Cale Yarborough out-hustles, out-muscles a top field of NASCAR giants. Cale Yarborough has won the Daytona 500.
They were racing before he stepped onto the NASCAR scene, and they'd be racing after. But damned if Cale Yarborough didn't leave his footprint on the sport by the time his driving days were done. Cale Yarborough was born in the flatlands of South Carolina to Julia and Annie Mae Yarborough on March 27, 1939. If life was tough, Cale's family was even tougher.
Cale's daddy was killed when he was 11 years old. His middle brother was 9, and his little brother was 3. So I had those 3 boys. Cale kind of felt like he was man of the house, that he could rule the roost, and he did it.
My dad got killed when he was 31 years old in an airplane. One day we were riding around the farm in an old pickup, and I was probably 7, 8, 9 years old, somewhere in there, and he just out of the blue said, "Son, always remember, be yourself. If people don't like you as who you are, they aren't going to like you as who you try to be." It's just a shame that he loved racing so much that he wasn't around to see how it turned out.
When my husband was killed, they said, "You going back home to your mother and daddy?" I said, "To mother and daddy with 3 children? No, I'll stay right here."
I don't know of anywhere else in the world that I would have loved to grown up in this little community called Sardis, which is right outside of Timmonsville.
The family business was tobacco, and Cale grew up working the fields. Although he had a head for business, Cale also had a heart for adventure.
A group of us young fellas one day, we used to swim in Lynch's River down here. We just came up on an alligator. We played with it more than we wrestled it, I'll be honest with you. I was struck by lightning right there where I grew up. Ball of lightning hit and bounced, came through the window, tore the television all up, and hit me right in the chest. When I woke up, of course, Mama was there and my brothers were there, the preacher was there, but thank goodness the good Lord was looking out for me. I didn't have any after effects.
I've seen the time I could have skinned him alive or given him away, but now I wouldn't take anything for him.
The Timmonsville High School class of '57, Cale was the big man on campus. He made a name for himself on the gridiron, where a word spread about the Timmonsville Flash.
I loved football. Played for the state championship one time and had a good coach. His name was Wallace Walker, and Wallace Walker was one man that gave me a lot of my determination. I learned an awful lot from that man, so I love the game of football.
We had heard about this guy that was such a good running back, and we all decided we'd just go over and see him. And Lord of mercy, he'd outrun a Harley Davidson for 60 yards. It was unreal.
I had several scholarships. I got a letter from the Washington Redskins asking me to try out with them.
Like any young man, Cale's interests weren't restricted just to sports.
A friend of mine told me one day, said, there's the prettiest little girl working in a drugstore in Atlanta that you ever saw. Sure enough, I went down there and at dinner time, and there she was behind the counter. And I knew right then I was in trouble.
So he went to the drugstore, and he asked me out for a date. I liked him immediately. We started dating, and it must have been love at first sight, because we didn't date too long before we were out at a diamond.
They were married in 1961, and Betty Jo would be Cale's constant companion throughout his life.
That's what I tell the race drivers all the time. I said, make sure you marry the right woman, because I've known very few great race drivers that didn't have a really great woman behind them.
In the late 1950s, cars were a way of life for any red-blooded American boy. Cale Yarborough was no exception.
I'd drag my race cars to school sometime and work on them during recess. When I first started, we were running. Wasn't any paved tracks in my part of the country. Everything was dirt. I grew up racing in places like Sumter and Columbia and Myrtle Beach, but they were all dirt tracks. I wouldn't take nothing for growing up on dirt. I think it helped me become the race driver that I eventually became.
Cale was 11 years old when Darlington Raceway opened in 1950. He grew up just 20 minutes away, and the South Carolina track always remained close to his heart.
First time I went, some friends of mine at school said they were going to the racetrack. I said, well, man, I sure would love to go too. But I didn't have any money. So when we got there, they bought the tickets. I just started walking along the edge of the fence. And I happened to look down and see a place that was the fence wasn't quite all the way to the ground. I said, you know, if I catch everybody looking the other way, I believe I might can get under that fence. Sure enough, that's what happened. And I sneaked in under the fence. And that was my first encounter with the fence. It's the toughest racetrack that I ever raced on, and I've raced on just about all of them. It's tough. Man, this was the toughest, hottest race that we ran all year. When you're born and raised on the farm and you have to work in the crops, gathering the crops in the summertime, it prepares you for something like a hot race car. Oh, man, it was good. I believe I can still do it.
On the local circuit, Cale quickly made a name for himself as a hard charger. After a series of rides, Cale had the good fortune to meet John Holman of Holman Moody fame.
I talked to John Holman, and he said, Cale, let me tell you what you need to do. He said, you need to come up here and go to work here at Holman and Moody's, and if something comes up, which might, you'll be right here on the spot. So that's what I did. I moved to Charlotte. John gave me a job sweeping the floors, and that's what I did for a long time.
He was so impressed with Cale that he gave him an opportunity to move to Charlotte. We did not even have a car when we moved to Charlotte. Mr. Homan gave us a car, and we had an apartment. I think Cale worked at the race shop there for $85 a week.
You got a child coming, you got to make a living. But the more I thought about it, I said, I know I can do this. I know I can do it. And I stuck at it.
Cale's persistence would soon pay off. 1965 marked a turning point in his career. Cale ran 46 races, finished 10th in points, and got his first win.
The first race he won, I think it was in Valdosta, Georgia. And after he won that, people started recognizing how, you know, he was a great person as well as a driver.
Cale's next move was racing for Banjo Matthews.
I think the move to Banjo Matthews was a real milestone move for him, though, because Banjo was so well thought of.
Banjo helped me a lot. He gave me the first real good ride that I had, and it went from there.
You have a lot of confidence?
A real lot. Banjo Matthews, my chief mechanic, has really put a lot of work into the car. It's working beautiful, and everything's going to be just fine, I hope.
How are you going to run the race?
Same way I did at Daytona, all out.
Cale put on quite a show, and true to his word, he drove all out.
So Cale Yarborough moves into second position, biding his time, waiting game that he was doing all afternoon.
You know, I've seen him take some pretty good rides. He's probably one of the few drivers that's ever been completely out of the joint. He and Junior Johnson.
I guess me and him is the only two's won out of that racetrack.
Look like he's going to make his move now. Look, he's getting far enough up, and those boys are in trouble. Oh, Yarborough right out of the racetrack.
And Cale went completely out. I said, well, you know, he's probably hurt himself. 2 seconds later, there he is walking back towards the garage area. I mean, most people would have faked being hurt.
Cale, it's good to see you standing here. What happened down there?
Sam McQuigg was leading the race, and I was running second. My right front fender caught his door, and I slid off his car, climbed the guardrail, and went over.
What kind of a ride down was it?
Well, it felt about like those astronauts been up in space 8 days. It felt about like 8 days I was up there, too.
NASCAR had a new star. His name was Cale Yarborough.
And here's a new leader now, Cale Yarborough. Number 27, driving a 66 Ford. Yarborough's from Timmonsville, South Carolina.
Under the guidance of Banjo Matthews, Cale became a more knowledgeable racer, and his reputation continued to spread.
Banjo settled Cale down to where he was becoming a 500-mile race driver.
He run real good, and the sportsman, you know, that he was running, and he run good for Banjo Matthews. So he's just a good upcoming driver. Some of the guys at Ford kind of liked him too.
At the end of the season, Ford put me with the Wood Brothers, took me from Banjo and put me with the Wood Brothers.
During the 1960s, the Wood Brothers were one of the best race teams in NASCAR. They were a perfect match for Cale.
Wood Brothers had an uncanny ability to pick drivers. And then once they picked them, to get the most out of them.
Wood Brothers cars have always won races, and you know, when I got there, I figured that I was about at the top.
He's a do or die. he just couldn't stand for anybody to pass him. We'd try to calm him down a little bit. He was hard to hold. I mean,
Despite early setbacks, Cale won 2 super speedway races in 1967. First Atlanta, and then Daytona.
This is a place where we do more drafting. We run so fast down here. We run at speeds close to 200 miles an hour down the straightaways, and you can take a car that won't run quite as fast as another car and run right with him, or maybe even pass him. This drafting really plays a tremendous part in a race down at Daytona Beach.
Cale's first win at Daytona would come with a little help from a future ally.
Here's Cale Yarborough coming in rather slowly, but he goes right through the Wood Brothers pit, clear through it. Apparently, he couldn't stop the car.
When I seen he was out of gas, I was the gas man for my car at that particular time, and I just gassed him. I'm a person that if I can't win myself, I'd like for one of my friends to win.
Cale did just that, marking the first of 3 straight wins at Daytona.
It certainly wasn't a soggy firecracker for you, Cale Yarborough, was it?
No, it wasn't. It was a big explosion.
In 1968, Ford designed the Cale Yarborough Mercury Cyclone. It was in this car that Cale and the Wood Brothers would have their greatest success.
Well, at a caution flag, this thing's skipping. And he comes in, and I crawl in the window to switch the ignition. He says, "Man," says, "you gotta fix this thing." He says, "It'll fly." Cuts the tire down, gets the lap down, he makes that up, and then passes for the lead about 10 laps to go of the race.
Did you have any tough problems throughout the contest?
Nothing but problems all day, Chris. Everything in the world went wrong, but I thank the great Wood Brothers. Nobody else, I don't feel, was trying to pull us through it.
The Daytona 500 has always been big, but my win in Darlington in 1968, I would take it over any Daytona 500 because that's where it all started for me. That was the last race on the old racetrack.
Cale hit the wall. He hit the wall and bounces right between those 2 cars. There is one of the most superb pieces of driving we'll ever see.
Everybody had to run up against that guardrail, and sometime during the race, if not every time, you was going to touch that guardrail. So that's where the Darlington strike came from. You had to kind of bounce off that guardrail if you was going to run fast around there.
Battling Cale for the win was another South Carolina native, David Pearson. They fought each other, and they fought the track.
That was one of the toughest races that probably he and I both ever drove.
Anytime that I had to run with him, he was tough to pass.
Pearson on the inside, trying to take him. And they're absolutely right together, and Pearson bangs him into the wall again, and Pearson's in a spin. Cale gets through, and Pearson is down on the infield.
Cale was unstoppable in 1968, winning 6 races in only 21 starts.
Well, Cale, it must be a happy day for you, eh?
Chris, this is the happiest day of my life.
4 big speedway races, a new record in one season, and the first time victory before a hometown crowd.
Right, and do it at home, that makes it better than anything in the world.
That 68 was the special race in my career.
Throughout his career, Cale was renowned for his toughness. It was written on his face and in the record books.
They didn't know come any tougher than Cale. I mean, it didn't make no difference. He was hard as that cement floor right there.
He was a tough one. There ain't a tougher driver ever been on the racetrack than he is.
There was nothing that scared Cale Yarborough. He was braver than Dick Tracy.
We'd gone like 4 or 5 races in a row where we didn't see eye to eye, and so we got to Darlington, and I caught him going out the gate, and I said, we gotta stop this junk before somebody gets hurt. And he said, "Get your best hope, big boy."
In Cale's 560 starts, he would never once meet a relief driver.
He did need one, but he wouldn't take it. We burned a rear end out. He come in down the pit road. He'd been smelling that oil, burn oil. Cale was vomiting out the window. They gave him oxygen and stuff. I forget who it was had fell out, and I had them standing by to get in the car. And when they let it down on the ground, Cale come back out and he said, "Ain't nobody gonna drive my car. I'm getting back in it." And he got back in and he finished the race too.
He's like a John Wayne type. He would never back down, it looked like, from a challenge. And you hear this, people talking about, hey, he was a farm boy that crawled underneath the fence to go to his first Darlington race. He didn't let anything stand in his way, and I think a lot of people admired him for that and his tenacity.
He is a very determined man. His motivations sometimes amazes me.
Did you really push the car, Cale?
I drove it hard as it run all day.
Cale Yarborough back from Vietnam and back in victory lane.
In the late 60s, America was a divided country. Cale showed his support for the U.S. troops in Vietnam as a guest of the USO in 1968.
I love this country, and I love my part of the country, and anything that I can do to help the United States, I'm all for it.
Major car manufacturers left NASCAR in 1970 to pursue other marketing avenues. That left Cale and the Wood brothers without factory backing.
We didn't think we was going to be racing the next year, you know, because Ford had pulled out of racing, and so we didn't know what we was going to do.
I was there with them for 5 years until Ford decided that they were going to pull out of racing, and by that time I'd built up enough debt that I had to have a job somewhere to pay my bills.
So he decided to go up and try IndyCar a little bit.
For the 1971-72 seasons, Cale left NASCAR to drive Indy cars.
I had run 2 years at Indianapolis in the Indy 500, 66 and 67. So Gene White, he came to me after Ford pulled out, and he says, "I'll give you a 2-year contract to run Indy cars, my Indy cars for 2 years with a good salary, and I could make some money racing and all," and so I didn't have any choice. I went with him.
Indy racing was up here. It was the epitome. It was number one. People wanted to go to where they thought was the ultimate.
That is known as the biggest race in the world, so it was quite an experience, and I'll never forget. I was sitting in that Indy car waiting for them to say, "Driver, start your engine." My racing career started in a soapbox derby, and down a hill in Darlington, South Carolina. And I was sitting in that little Indy car, and all of a sudden, I was sitting in that soapbox derby car, looking down that hill, and I was looking down the straightaway at Indy, and it was just a thrill. I said, look where I started, and look what I'm fixing to do.
The transition from stock cars to open-wheel racing proved difficult. Cale's best finish was 10th place in the 1972 Indianapolis 500.
But they were little cars. They were probably something where you get out of the stock car and you get in the Indy car and you go, pretty much feel like King Kong, you know, because you had this little bitty thing that you could thrash around.
Never had the equipment to win, even though it took 2 years away from my stock car career. I'm glad I did it.
Cale was always one of those kind of mysterious type of drivers, and I always wondered if he would wind up being like another A.J. Foyt, because he would just seem like the man who could drive anything.
When the contract was up, I wanted to come back to NASCAR, because NASCAR was where my heart was. I needed a ride, Junior Johnson needed a driver.
Junior Johnson was a legend as a driver. But by 1973, Junior Johnson, the car owner, was still searching for the right driver.
You know, I wanted a guy that was kind of my meditation of what I was when I was a driver. And I didn't give up. I didn't concede to losing.
Junior was one of my heroes when he was driving race cars. He ran just as hard as he could run every lap, and that's the way I did my whole career.
The last American hero, Junior Johnson. What kind of instructions did you give Cale Yarborough for the race? Go to the front.
Success would not come quickly for Cale, Junior, or the number 11 team.
Once you get a chance to see Cale evolve and win all the big races, and then it was time for him to take the next step, he had an opportunity to go to work for Junior Johnson. And to be perfectly honest, he tore up everything Junior had. And that was one of those concepts of, you know, you run it as hard as you possibly can, which Cale was notorious for doing, and let us worry about how to fix the race car.
It was just the car. You had to get the car underneath of it. And if you did, it didn't make no difference to him. He'd drive the fire out of that thing.
Chris, stop a little bit. This is a real tricky part of the racetrack. Getting into number 4.
Anybody's ever watched him drive a race car makes you think this car's got to be a handful, because all he did the whole time was he kept working the car, Cale could feel things, and I think that's the reason why he wasn't afraid to put a race car on his shoulders when it wasn't quite right. He could adjust.
I always told the people he drove harder down the straightaway than I drove in the corner. I mean, that's how hard he drove a race car.
Then in 1976, everything clicked. Cale put together a banner year, scoring 9 wins and his first Cup championship. Cale and Junior were just hitting their stride.
Junior and I kind of grew up in the rural South, you know. Of course, he was in the mountains and I was down here in the flatlands, but he and I thought a lot alike.
I think they were basically looking at one another in the mirror. They were so much alike. Their common interest away from the racetrack, but their common desire and what they wanted out of their race team.
If this car here, number 11, can get to the starting line, not the finish line, if it can take the green flag to begin the race, then the man who drives it will be the champion of the year for the first time in his life. And that's Cale Yarborough. Stand right here. Cale, just got to get it to the green flag.
Right. That's all we got to do, Jim. It's been a long, hard season. This is the race I've been looking for all year, the last one.
And there's the jubilation in the Junior Johnson pit, because their man, Cale Yarborough, has won the year-long championship.
Cale, you won the championship the way a champion should win it, and I want to congratulate you and wish you well next year.
Thank you, Chris. We'll be back.
Winning that first one and getting that behind you was probably the best one for me.
It's all over me. A lot of happiness here in Victory Lane. It's always like that.
In 1976 through 1978, Cale was nearly unbeatable, winning 28 races and becoming the first driver in NASCAR history to capture 3 straight Cup titles. In 1979, Daytona 500 was the first Cup race broadcast live to a national television audience. It marked a new chapter in NASCAR and the legend of Cale Yarborough.
A lot of people don't realize that the reason why we were down so many laps in the course of 1979 Daytona 500 was because of the 2 Allison brothers wrecking one another and us getting caught up in it early part of the race and getting stuck in the mud.
Donnie Allison's out of control, spinning. He gets hit by his brother. He's all the way around. Cale Yarborough
was on the grass, that wet grass now incredibly slippery. And Cale Yarborough desperately trying to get that car back on the track now.
Despite his early setbacks, Cale challenged Donnie Allison for the lead.
He would run him down, slingshot him down the backstretch to get a lap back. And he did that to Donnie all day long.
I had made up 2 or 3 laps on Donnie. Donnie had been watching me do that all day, and he knew what was coming. He knew what was going to happen. I love to do that slingshot move. You know, it's kind of a daring move to wait to the last lap.
All come down to this to decide the most incredible Daytona 500 in history. Out of turn 2, Donnie Allison in first. Where will Cale make his move? He comes to the inside. Donnie Allison throws the block. Cale hits him. He slides. Donnie Allison slides. They hit again. They drive into the turn. They're hitting the wall. They're head on the wall.
Ended up that we got tangled up together and ended up in the fence, 2 tore-up race cars. When I ran off the racetrack, I sure didn't turn back in to wreck him. But when it was over, I was pretty hot. He cost me a chance of winning another Daytona 500, and I was hot enough to fight over it, and that's what I did.
Bobby Allison is stopped by his brother to help. There's Bobby Allison's car, number 15.
Whenever Bobby pulled up, it was just like, you know, here you are again, you're sticking your nose where it doesn't belong. It wasn't Bobby just wanting to give his brother a ride back to the garage area.
Bobby came up to, I don't know where he's going to pick him up and get him out of the way or what he's going to do.
Cale's hitting Bobby through the window. And so I ran over there and I grabbed Cale by the arm and I spun him around. And I said, if you want to fight, I'm the cat you need to be fighting with, buddy. So I figured it was going to be a double teaming, so so we went at it for a little while, you know.
And there's a fight between Cale Yarborough and Donnie Allison. The tempers overflowing. They're angry. They know they have lost. And what a bitter defeat.
I was walking back to the truck because I knew they'd wrecked. Somebody ran up to me and said, Junior, they're fighting over here. I said, I don't give a damn if they kill each other.
That was in the heat of the moment, man. And I was mad, and
I think that the problem that we ran into at Daytona with Donnie Allison affected us getting out of the box like we needed to and really kind of disrupted the rhythm.
1979 was disaster. You know, when we came back from Daytona, we couldn't get anything going right. We just couldn't get it turned around.
Near the end of the 1980 season, Cale made the decision to end his run with Junior Johnson Racing.
Cale Yarborough, the number 11 car, in one of his final drives for the Junior Johnson team.
Well, as he crawls out of that Chevrolet, he looks like he's tired, Cale.
Well, I sure am, Ed. 500 miles is a long way here, but I just think I was a little bit burnt out from running all the races, but I could still do it. Well, I did.
There's one thing I'll say about Junior Johnson. Junior does not take having someone leave him lightly.
Well, you know, he does what he wanted to do, and I did what I wanted to do. If you're in racing and time comes for you to separate, you just go your way and let them go their way and go on down the road.
Cale's road led back home to his wife and children.
My girls were sitting out there with some friends of theirs, and I said, well, what are you girls just sitting around here for, doing nothing? I said, won't you ride your bicycles or something? And one of them looked up and said, Daddy said our bicycles are broke. Why hadn't you told me not to fix them? She said, Daddy, we have told you and told you and told you. And that was it. That's the day that I made up my mind that I'd tell Junior that I was going to go with somebody that ran a limited schedule.
We had a very close relationship with Junior Johnson, and I knew that Cale was making a tremendous amount of money, but I also was really glad that he was going to cut back on his schedule because my children were almost getting ready to get out of high school, and Kelly and those, I think, were already getting ready to, you know, growing up. So I think that he just kind of was getting at the age that he, you know, really appreciated his family more so than the older you get. And I think he made the right decision.
In 8 seasons, Cale won 55 races and 3 championships with Junior Johnson. It marked the high point in Cale's 31 years as a driver.
Kids, parents.
With success comes fame. Throughout his life, Cale Yarborough enjoyed the spotlight.
We all must get involved if we expect to help McGruff take a bite out of crime.
He mingled with presidents, TV stars, and musicians. He was even in a movie with me back in 1983 called Stroker Ace.
I did a lot of things. I had a few parts in some movies. I did 2 of the Dukes of Hazzard shows, and that was just a lot of fun. They still run them on television today, so I wouldn't want to do that for a living, but I wouldn't take anything for the opportunity to have done some of that stuff.
After racing for Junior, Cale drove in a number 27 Valvoline car for M.C. Anderson in 1981 and 1982. The final act of Cale's career came in a number 28 Hardee's car. Working with Waddell Wilson, Cale saved some of his best performances for last.
The first time we got together was at Daytona, you know, in '83. When we go to qualify, we wanted to be the car to break 200 mile an hour at Daytona. The first lap was over 200 mile an hour.
The second lap was faster, maybe too fast. Once again, Cale walked away.
Going in, field kerosene, and he's sitting, and doctors checked him over, top of his uniform down. He looked up at me like a whip pup and said, "Well, you done everything right but one thing." I said, "Well, what was that?" He said, "You didn't put the controls in it so I could fly."
At the 1983 Daytona 500, Cale gave fans an onboard view from inside his winning race car.
Cale Yarborough has just taken you for a ride into first place in the 25th annual Daytona 500.
It was a good one. It was one of those take the gloves off, Mama, this is going to be a tough one.
White flag is out, last lap. Baker there on the point. He's got to be looking in that rear view mirror. Cale Yarborough has one thing on his mind right now, to take that shot.
Getting by Cale on the last lap would have been just about as hard as trying to hold him off. I look back, it was too late to even try to block.
Here comes Yarborough to the inside, identical to 1979. Baker gets him room, and going into first goes Cale Yarborough. Yarborough's taking the lead. 3 cars side by side fighting at the line. Cale Yarborough does it. What tremendous strategy, Cale, coming down that back straightaway.
Well, I knew what I had to do, Ken, and it's like a checker game, you know, you put yourself in the right spot, you win the game, and that's what happened.
The accolades here in Victor Lane, that's his car owner, Harry Ranier, giving his congratulations.
1 year later, Cale made it back-to-back wins at the Daytona 500. This time, Darrell Waltrip was the victim of the slingshot.
Down to the inside, the move he loves. Here he comes up to the inside. It is Cale Yarborough taking first, and they're coming to the finish line. At the line, it is Cale Yarborough. He's done it again.
Cale had mastered that move. He had gotten to the point where it was like playing chess with a guy that you know he's going to do it, but there wasn't a whole lot you could do about it.
If you don't try to wreck him, you're going to get passed. I don't care who it is.
I practiced it during the race and pretty much perfected it.
The slingshot was Cale's favorite move. The 1984 Firecracker 400 was a rare occasion when it came up short.
They are door to door in the dogleg. They touch, coming to the trial, down to the line.
Coming down the front straight. Here they are, Sam. They will come across the yellow line.
It's Richard Petty by a foot. Petty wins his 200th career NASCAR victory.
I always wished that I had that race to run over again. I think I'd have been a little bit harder to get by than I was.
After 4 decades and 83 wins, Cale drove his final race in 1988. But he wasn't ready to leave the sport altogether.
I was thinking, you know, I wasn't going to drive forever, but I wanted to stay involved in the sport forever. And the only way to do that was to have your own racing team.
For all his success behind the wheel, victories as an owner proved elusive.
Tony Furr asked me on the radio, he said, how's the car? And I said, I'm telling you, it's pretty loose. And Cale came on the radio, which he never did, and he said, doesn't look loose from up here. And I'm thinking, okay, yes, sir. And we came in, no changes. We got tires and went out there and hung on to the thing because that's what he did.
It's going to be John Andretti winning.
Today we came through and got the first win for Cale Yarborough Motorsports, and feels great.
Anytime you win, it's so important. And for Cale, owning the race team and that being his first win as an owner, actually ended up being his only one, it was big.
Now, Jimmy, when you're making history...
Even though he retired from the sport, Cale remains a vital link to NASCAR history.
Please welcome to the stage the other 3-time champion, Cale Yarborough.
I've been a big fan, and that was a huge honor for me to see him that night on stage when I got my 3rd championship. The fun thing I remember is on stage when he pointed out that I just tied him. I hadn't beat his record.
All records are going to be broken and tied. Tied really is all he's done. So, buddy, you got some work to do. You know, you got some work to do.
Looked at me, and I'll never forget that look in his eyes. I mean, he still has that competitive fire. I mean, he was very happy that I had tied him, but he didn't want me to break it.
That doesn't bother me. Listen, to be as blessed as I was to be able to be the first one to win 3 consecutive championships, lasted for 30-some years. If I'd have had to pick somebody to do it, I couldn't have picked a better person than Jimmy Johnson.
Hey, say, buddy, you headed there again?
I don't know. We're going to try. We're going to try.
Cale's drive as a racer helped steer him towards becoming a successful businessman.
All right. Talk to you later. Bye. All right. I was blessed in my racing career, and I've been blessed in my business career. So it's just been great.
Cale's a businessman and a farmer. He loves to get out there and work in the fields. He built his own lake at his house. Every time I call him for the past 3 years to do my radio show, what do you think I hear? Well, I just about got that lake done. I got some more stumps out, and Betty Jo said I'm going to have to be careful now. I'm getting to the deep end. You know, he's that kind of guy.
Cale Yarborough was a self-made racing champion whose career was a hell of a lot like his life. Tough, determined, and always entertaining. He'll be remembered as one of the greatest NASCAR drivers of all time. Cale spent his career scraping for every inch. So today he can sit back, And look at all the miles he's traveled.
Dale Inman, one of the fastest pit crews in the business.
They're not changing tires. They're only adding gasoline. A very quick pit stop. What strategy?
He was a master at communications.
Dale and them just got figured a little bit.
He was the king of stock car racing's crew chief.
Well, I'm still excited about the race, but I don't feel the immediate pressure that used to be stowed upon you, you know what I mean? And but I feel for the crew chiefs today. It's altogether different, and I tell them it ain't always been this easy, but it's just a different world, but that's the way it is.
People forget where racing came from. It wasn't always about the drivers, because every driver had to have, even back in the day when it started, he may have been the driving force behind the team. He may have been the guy footing the bill. He may have been the guy pushing to get the cars built and things like that. I'm talking way, way back. But he always had a buddy. He always had a guy that was with him through thick and thin, trying to help him build that car to make it go faster.
From NASCAR's earliest days, that guy has been called the crew chief. And as the sport is transformed, the role of the crew chief has become more specialized.
41, good lap.
The simplest way to explain an old-style crew chief, it's like being with your mother. Okay, you just do what she says, and you assume she knows everything to do, from wake-up calls to getting the guys up at night, to making sure the guys were in bed at night, to making sure everybody was going to dinner on time, to hotel rooms, to rental cars.
He worked on the car, he pitted the car, he took the car to the racetrack, he made the decisions of how to pit the car, and then he talked to the driver about what they needed to do to the car. Now the crew chiefs don't even get their hands dirty.
You don't have to know how to build an engine or know how to build a race car these days. You could be a manager, put the right people in the right places, call the right shots, you know.
But pit this time, pit this time.
Now you're more of a facilitator, administrator, with a lot of car knowledge to back it up.
Do it, Bud. Get back in that rhythm we had in happy hour yesterday, Bud. That was a really nice race piece we had. You can do it.
I could probably be a crew chief now, just walk around and have all my people in the right place. How's the things going, guys? And then just go on about your business, let them handle it.
As the sport's grown and gotten bigger, you know, you're more in the day-to-day operations business.
You've got to be a head coach, you've got to be an engineer, you have to be a rocket scientist, and you got to be a psychologist, all rolled into one.
It may be a little less technical now than it was, but it's exactly where Dale Inman was 35 years ago.
35 years ago, the NASCAR landscape seemed like a foreign land. But it was a land ruled by the 43 car of Petty Enterprises, with a king behind the wheel and Dale Inman running the show.
He was Richard Petty's best friend. He was Richard Petty's cousin. And he was the king of stock car racing's crew chief.
Dale's friend, brother, uncle, surrogate father, boss, teacher. He's everything, all rolled into one person for me.
Dale Inman was kind of like a legend or a hero to me. Dale was a great tire changer. Dale was probably one of the best tire changers in the business.
He was the prototype of what you need to be a successful crew chief.
When you grew up, you wanted to be like Dale Inman.
He was just such a great leader, and he was able to put the right people in the right place, and you know, everybody respected him.
If you find somebody that doesn't like Dale Inman, something's wrong with that person.
If he ever grabs your arm or shakes your hand, you're in trouble.
You know, you walk up to shake hands with him, and while you're shaking hands, he'll grab your arm and bring you to your knees.
Was you making fun of me?
He's always been kind of a show-off, okay, from the standpoint that, you know, when he walks up, he'll grab your hand and try to squeeze it, or he'll hit you on the arm like that.
This man's crippled more people in a car wreck.
He's always grabbing your arm and pinching it, putting a bruise on your arm, or knocking you in the shoulder.
Guys, this is Dale Inman, and he was the crew chief for Richard Petty for most of all the 200 races that he won.
There's a nerve right there on your arm that you can get, and I can always find that spot pretty good. But that was just my way of, I guess, being friendly, if you want to.
And that's just his way of saying hello. You know, I like you. You know what I mean? I mean, he don't do that to people he don't like or don't know.
And he's a lot older than I am. Yeah, he's got kids older than I am.
It meant a lot to us young folks to get pinched or get thumped in the head or get hollered at from across the garage area, because that meant Dale was noticing you. It was important for Dale to notice you.
People forget that Dale was with more than just Richard Petty. They don't understand that he won a championship with Terry Labonte.
You know, everybody talks about Richard Petty winning 7 championships, Earnhardt won 7, but he's won 8. You know, so that kind of sets him apart.
One of the greatest crew chiefs of all time.
As we look at what we used to do, how we used to do, I mean, you know, Dale used to be the crew chief, but he changed tires, he drove the truck to the racetrack, then he worked on the car at home. So it was a smaller group doing the same thing. And the cars were just as complicated. I mean, you know, the whole thing is, you know, getting 4 tires to stick to the track and outrunning everybody. And so the theme's still the same. It's just so much dadgum technology and stuff now that we didn't know what technology was. We still don't, as far as that's concerned.
The house before you get to mine, that's where I was raised, but in between the 2 houses, it's gone, but I was born in that house. So when I lay down at night, I'm about 100 yards from where I was born. So
really?
Yeah, not in the hospital where I was born. So,
Not like being at home, is it?
It's nothing like being at home.
For all his life, Dale Inman's home has been the Piedmont region of North Carolina.
Here in Level Cross, you know, as of right now, we got 1 stoplight, and Level Cross has grown some, but not greatly. Me being involved in racing certainly wasn't planned. I think it's one of them things where it just happened.
Dale's career in NASCAR happened because he happened to live just down the road from his cousins, the Pettys.
I think we're second cousins on my mother's side. We grew up together in the same community. He lived about a quarter mile down the road. He's really my second brother. My mother and his mother were real close friends, and we visited them a lot. They visited us, and you know, we'd get out in the front yard and play ball with a rag because we didn't have a ball. Okay, whatever, you know. And then we got a little bit older. We got bicycles. On Sunday afternoon, we'd all get together and race bicycles out through the woods. All the stuff that kids done back then, because you didn't have TV, you didn't have radio. So we lived out in the country, so we did the country thing. We went to high school together, played ball together, double dated together, raced up and down the road against each other. Then as my dad started getting into the racing, Dale hung around with us, so naturally he rung around our shop.
Before me and Richard Maurice could play ball or go swimming or do our thing, we had to have Lee's race car ready. And the education we all got was certainly through Lee, you know what I mean? And he was a very strict professor, to say the least.
We used to pack all the wheel bearings, you know, kept the cars washed, gassed up, I guess. And as time progressed, you know, then we got into fixing the brakes, then we got into working on the engine, we got to working the transmissions. So just over a period of time, we learned to do about everything there was on the race car.
In the garage, Dale studied the nuts and bolts of race cars. When Lee took them to the track, he became a student of racing.
I guess I started going to the races with him in 1950, you know, and a lot of our early races was just Richard, Maurice, Miss Petty, and Lee going to the races. And if they were around here, and maybe if we didn't spend but one night, I would go with them too. It was just a family affair. When we went and raced, we just kindly stayed in our little section with the car and run the race, took the car up to the family car or whatever we had to tow with, and brought it home. It's hard for people to realize that that's the way the sport was back then. Working on the race car, you wasn't the local hero or anything. I don't know where you wasn't shined upon as they are today, you know. There was a little bit of bootlegging going on all around this area, and they might have been shined on better than what the race car drivers were.
Learning from a three-time champion taught Dale how to prepare like one. So when Richard was ready to drive, Dale was ready to be his crew chief.
Richard didn't get to drive till he was 21 years old, because that was the rule with NASCAR then, and he just jumped in a race car and went.
The very first race I ever ran, we went to Columbia, South Carolina, in, I guess, July 1958. Dale and myself and another boy went with us. And that was the pit crew. That was the whole deal, buddy. I had never been around a racetrack at all. So, you know, Dale stuffs me in the car and gets me all set up.
So they turned me loose. Real slick race, and we got down there, and Joe Weatherly didn't have a ride, so you know, we didn't know where Richard could run 200 laps or not on dirt or anything like that. So Joe was standing by, you know, just in case. 2 or 3 different times during the race, and the signal for a driver relief back then was, you know, going to your head, you know. 2 or 3 times Richard went to his head, and I'd go get Joe. He'd put his helmet on, his little golf gloves, and Richard'd shake it off. And go, coming home, I said, what the devil was you doing? He said his head was itching. Now, him trying to scratch his head through a helmet. So you see what I had to work with all these years. He said, we got a driver here. He ain't got a clue what's going on.
When the race is over, I look over at Dale and I said, you know, I might like this driving.
We were learning kind of the ropes at that time, and for some unearthly reason, most of it worked.
Ten.
I'm good, thank you. Who's that?
Casey Mears.
See, I'm gonna write mine where you can read it.
I appreciate that.
Who you pulling for today?
Tony Stork.
Who?
Tony Stork.
Can I get you next to Richard Petty there?
Richard who?
Yeah, the man. You guys have been together a long time.
Yeah, and he said he'd won a lot of races, hadn't been for me.
By the early 60s, Richard Petty was growing into a contender, helping Dale Inman turn his life in racing into his livelihood.
About 1963, I guess, was the first time that there was really enough money outside the family to pay me. So I went several years where it was just, if you want to call it a hobby or what, I don't know what it was, but I guess it was more or less a passion.
It was a long time where Dale kind of run the show, but nobody called him a crew chief. So, you know, I don't know how many years Dale was a crew chief before they ever put crew chief beside his name.
I always used to laugh about it. I always say he's been a crew chief since he was 8 years old, when they were racing bikes and doing stuff like that. As my Uncle Maurice and Dale and the King grew up, one became a driver, one became an engine builder, and one became a crew chief. And it just seems like that's the way it should be. I've never heard them speak of ever a time when they sat down and said, this is your job, this is my job, this is it. It's like four guys that love music, but they're all brothers and cousins, and next thing you know, they got a band. You know what I mean? Now, how did you get to be the bass player, and how did you get to be the drummer? It just kind of evolved that way.
You know, Lee might have let me drove if I'd asked, but I never did ask. I just couldn't see myself tearing up somebody's car, you know what I mean? And, you know, in the early days, Richard tore up a lot of cars.
In those early years, the king was not yet the king. Richard and Dale had been taught to prepare like champions. Now, they had to learn how to win.
We started with nothing. We didn't have any engineers to tell us what to do. You just learn by how, this is what's in front of you guys. Learn what to do and how to make it work.
In 1964, Petty Enterprises received a new kind of racing engine from their manufacturer in Detroit. The Chrysler Hemi was the tool they needed to win. But first, they had to learn how to use it.
The Plymouths and Dodges have special engines, hemispherical combustion chamber jobs, putting out over 500 horsepower.
Richard went out and run it faster we'd ever run. He come in about white as a ghost. He said, we got to work on this thing.
At that time, all the cars had bench seats in it, and you just had the seat belt in it. I go down in the corner and turn that thing. Was running so fast, the G-force, I couldn't turn the car. I'm hanging on to the steering wheel, the reason I can't turn it. So I'd have to let off the gas to get it around the corner.
He said, well, I'm out from under the steering wheel. I'm over here, you know. And so we took two befores and put them together and wrapped them with an army blanket and then bolted them through the side of just the back of a bench seat, you know. And he laid on that. And he said that was the big thing that helped him. And we wound up winning the race, which was big, you know.
And Petty is still turning laps at a better than 170 miles an hour, so he hasn't let off the gas one single bit. He wants to win this race and win it big. And there's the checkered flag for Richard Petty, the winner of the 6th annual Daytona 500.
You know, Richard won 7 Daytona 500s, and we could always say if you win the first race, you got a chance to win them all, you know what I mean?
In 1967, they didn't win them all, but they came pretty close.
Richard Petty wins the Southern 500.
We just hit. I mean, we won a race, then we went home, worked on the car, went back and won the second race. Yeah, that's great. Then all of a sudden you win 5, and you win 6, you win 7, 8, 9, 10 races in a row.
Petty flies under the checkered flag, winner.
And, you know, the sad part about during all that, while it was happening and everything, I knew we was going to lose someday, and that, I mean, it hurt. I don't know. I just knew that we wasn't going to win forever.
They didn't win forever, but they set a mark that would stand the test of time. 27 wins in 48 races. A championship season for the ages.
There were days when they knew they had everybody beat. They didn't even unload the toolboxes. They were in people's heads then like nobody's ever been today.
Petty's won more races in one season than any other driver in NASCAR history.
We're not trying to set any records as far as who can win the most races or have that many in a row. It's just the next one that's the most important. The next race is the most important race of our life. And he was really, really good keeping everybody motivated and headed in that direction.
We probably didn't have time to get caught up in it because we knew while we was at the racetrack when we come in, there was no days off. We went right to work on the race car, and we had to turn it around, and we done every bit of that with one race car. We had it down to a pretty good science, we thought, from one track to another and different size tracks and stuff like that. And of course, Richard was probably in his prime of years in racing, and
that was the way it's supposed to be. I mean, that was our plan was that every race we went to try to win it. And at the time that we started, Dale had to feel something of what I was feeling. There was some one of them deals where we communicated without communicating because we were that close and we thought about the same things and all that. So I was 50% of it as far as driving the car, and he was the other 50% that made the call in where to change tires, when to stop, what to do, and all that stuff. So when it really came down to the whole deal, it was strictly a team effort, which is, I guess it's still a team effort. But back then it was probably more of a team effort because you didn't have the communications and all that we have today.
So how the hell do you actually win a race here? You won plenty of them, didn't you?
Yeah, but it's a different world today. I know that. Yeah, Richard was awful good here. You know, it's hard on equipment here. But Richard understood his equipment. You know what I mean? And there'll be some brake fade here, won't it, today?
By the time it's over with, we'll be.
Y'all do good, man. Be careful. Yeah. We'll just have to wait and see, won't we? But I'll guarantee you there'll be a winner.
Throughout the 60s and 70s, Petty Enterprises was the dominant team in NASCAR. A threat to win in any given race on any type of track.
The late 60s up until about 78, you know, it was good times for Petty Enterprises here out of Level Cross.
Petty Blue flies under the checkered flag. Winner.
That was a time when you went to the racetrack that you expected to bring home a trophy. We were winning races with Pete Hamilton, with Buddy Baker. The King was driving. I mean, it was incredible.
So it's a happy crew along pit road with the Petty name on their back.
At one time, this was kind of the place, you know what I mean?
And it was the kind of place where young men looking to break into the sport looked to catch the eye of Dale Inman, to become his pupil. Lesson 1. Opportunity was all about timing.
There's been some very successful people in the sport, still in it, that's come through here, you know what I mean? And I guess the way it was, if we needed somebody at the particular time that they showed up, that's kind of the way we hired them.
Us younger folks at Petty Enterprises always looked to Dale. He was a fantastic teacher. I always remember when the weather turned cold, he'd get on us for not having sweatshirts or jackets. He was like the big brother you didn't have.
He treated them like kids, but they didn't. I don't think they felt like that. They felt like that this was somebody that was really looking at their best interest.
Dale was just one of those people. He always had a saying like my dad, if you're 5 minutes early, you're 10 minutes late. Dale is always early.
Race shop opened at 7. Dale was always there about 6:45. And he was always the last guy to leave in the afternoon.
I tried to lead by example, you know what I mean, and I wasn't scared to work and everything. Our main goal was to make the race car better, and that's what we thrived on.
His greatest strength was his leadership ability, and is able to take people with multiple personalities in multiple areas and bring them all to one common goal.
A lot of guys in that position are really don't want to hire anybody that they feel like could threaten them as far as their job goes. And Dale had never had that. Dale realized that he needed to surround himself with the best people that he could.
As long as I've been around, I probably didn't learn as much about the race car as I should have. but I always was lucky enough to have pretty good people that I could point them where they needed to be. And there was so much I couldn't do, I'm going to be honest with you. But we had good people that I knowed where they was good in their area, and that's where I would put them. As far as being a good welder, I wasn't. As far as a good engine man, I wasn't. But I think me and Richard communicated real good to understand what it took for him to be where he wanted to be. I think that was my strong asset.
Me and we grew up together. We were close all through the years, and then when we did start racing together and stuff, it was all kind of like having one brain and two bodies. Okay, in other words, if I just sort of thought, hey, this car is a little bit loose, somehow or another Dale realized that.
Dale Inman, the crew chief there, has been talking to Petty quite a bit.
His communication skills made it work, and it made it work with us here with 6 or 7 people working on the car. So you kind of had to shuffle them around, sort of like leading sheep around, you know, but he didn't make them feel like sheep.
But Dale had a leadership style that made others flock to him.
When you worked at Petty Enterprises, there was a right way to do things, the wrong way to do things, and the Petty way of doing things.
There's an awful lot of really good racing mechanics that came through Petty Enterprises and were taught almost by osmosis from Dale Inman.
They taught us how to work on cars and do it proper. And part of that was, they always said to us, you don't always win the race, but you better look good in defeat.
It was how you carried yourself. It was how you had confidence but weren't cocky. How you were frustrated with things but didn't get angry. And that was all taught by Dale Inman.
It's how you approach getting the car ready to get to the racetrack as part of winning the race. It's not running a coil on a car for 6 races in a row. It's replacing it after 2 or 3. It's those little things that would put you out.
It was the attention to detail. It was about all the mechanics of the cars being perfect. I mean, when these cars rolled out of the shop, loaded on the trailers, head to the track, they were perfect.
We used to put the dashes in the car with just a flathead screw, and we would have to go back and turn all the slots the same way so that they were straight across or either straight up and down, so it was all uniform. So when you start worrying about which way a screw's turned on a dash in a car, then you're paying attention to detail. When you did it at the time, you thought, this is the worst place in the world to work. My God, they're driving us like slaves. And you look back on it and you think, it was a lot of fun.
I don't know that I would have been as successful as I was, or my team was, without Dale being the leader per se. And then on the other hand, we kind of pick on each other that if I'd had a good crew chief, I could have probably won twice as many races.
He tells that all the time.
Maybe I believe him. And he says if he'd had a good driver, he could have won more. So it's sort of in between. But that's the closeness that we have, that we can do that without bothering anything.
Darn is hard to pass here.
Yeah.
Track position, lucky dogs, and I think the cars have got so much power they're tearing up the rear tires, you know what I mean? Do you see them tires?
Yeah. A lot of those left rears looking clean.
Yeah.
Sometimes they get better in a race, let's see.
Look at this one.
Dale's greatest strength as a crew chief was observation. Okay, he observed what everybody else was doing, especially during a race or even before a race. He knew where the competition was.
He'd come around, and talk to you and then try to find out what gear you're running. When he'd find out what you was running, then you say, well, what are you running? Well, he's gone, which is what he's supposed to do. But
the Petty crew displayed typically cool pit work and strategy.
He was a strategist before there was such thing as strategy. 2 tires, 4 tires, let's gas and go. And the other pit crew would be looking at Inman and say, okay, they're going to change 4. And just as the cars would stop on pit road and the other pit crew would run around the car, Inman guys would gas and go, and that car's sitting on a jack, and then you drive off and you're 100 seconds ahead. I can't tell you how many races Richard Petty won, not because he was the fastest car, but because Dale Inman made the right call in the pits.
There's probably not a lot of documentation of the things that went on, but I think when you look at their 1981 Daytona 500, it was really a cool move.
In 81, we had a Buick and a bunch of Pontiacs, they had Chevrolets, and Bobby Allison come with a Le Mans Pontiac, which is different than everybody else's. Anyhow, it wound up being the quickest car.
Once again, Bobby Allison goes down the inside and zips into first place.
He had that Le Mans, and it was slick, you know what I mean, compared to the rest of them. And all day long, we drafted with him. And there was about 5 of us that was hanging on to him, and he was setting the pace.
We come down to the last pit stop deal.
We assume this is a regular stop for him, but this is going to be the final stop.
And he got gas and changed 2 tires. And then the next crowd, they all come in and follow suit. And Dale kept saying, stay out there, stay out there.
So help me, I told Richard about halfway through the race, I said, Richard, the tires are not giving up any and they're not wearing any. If it comes down to something at the end, bear with me.
This is where Dale was so good. He looks to see what these other people are doing, and he said, okay, how can we beat them? So he said, okay, we can't beat these guys if we come in and get tires and get gas like they do. We're still a top 4 or 5 car, but that's as good as we can do. Just as I come down pit road, Dale says, gas only. And I said, we just won the race.
Dale Inman, the crew chief on this car, directing the traffic here as they go to work on the right side. They're not changing tires. A change of pace here for the Petty crew. They're only adding gasoline and either way, a very quick pit stop. What strategy?
So it just worked out perfect that we could come in and put 1 can of gas in and got about a 7-second lead.
10 laps to go. Richard Petty's lead is decreasing.
Dale, you've had the stopwatch on every lap. What's happening?
Ned, we're running pretty good. We're pretty well holding on. We've lost about a second to him in the last 4 or 5 laps.
He's coming up on some lap traffic.
Right
What's
now,
that?
we just picked up about a half a second on a draft car, so we got 10 laps to go. And right now we got a 9-second lead. And he lost a little ground that lap, and we gained a little bit. So there's 10 hard laps to go, Ned.
And you're going to be pretty close on gas, aren't you?
It's going to be close on gas, but we're safe on gas.
He was figuring gas mileage from drafting, and then when he got out front, he was running wide open and used more gas. And as he's coming into the trial to get the checkered flag, it ran out of gas. So it's probably another one of them things that was just kind of meant to be.
Is he running out of fuel? He's coming across the line slowly, but he takes the checkered flag.
That was a pinnacle, I think, of if anybody looks at Dale, all the years and all the figuring and stuff that he did that they didn't see, they seen it that day. It came out that day that Dale Inman won the race. Okay, I just happened to be in the race car.
Richard, you pull one up.
Yeah, Dale and them just out-figured him a little bit.
I guess from my standpoint, that was probably the most strategy that we used down there, and that was all Dale's call. Because all I was doing was sitting there running wide open, doing the best I could, and I couldn't make up any more time. So he made it up in the pits because of the call that he had.
You know, that was a pit decision that Dale made just like that to do it, you know, from his gut. And that's what I loved about Dale. He always had a game plan. He always planned things out. But he had that gut feeling, instinct of what it took to be a winner every week.
The celebration continues for Richard Petty. His first cousin, who's been with him for every race but 2 in his entire career, is standing by with Ned Jerry.
Dale winning this race goes back a long way. Just what happened here today was not the total story.
We worked our rears off, Ned, to get ready for this race, and a lot of families have sacrificed because we've worked night and day to get ready.
When you say sacrifice, what do you mean?
Sometimes you have to put your family aside, it seems like, to get the car ready.
It was unreal how hard we was working all that time, and the whole time we was down there and everything, Rod Osterland was trying to get me to come and be the crew chief for Dale and all that, and it actually took place along then. All that was very, very stressful. That was one of the biggest decisions I've ever made in my life.
Yeah, it was tough. Me and Dale had done talk, and Dale had just been here so long and done so much that he said, okay, maybe I need to try something else.
It was the highest high and the lowest low for the King, I think, because they had won the Daytona 500 again, but he knew the guy who had been his crew chief for 30 or 40 years was going somewhere else, and that would probably be their last win together.
Trying to hurt me.
I can't hurt you. I hurt him.
Broke my sternum one time.
You know why?
He deserved it.
He smart-mouthed me.
Hit me right there so hard.
I didn't hit you hard, did I?
Pretty hard.
Did you smart-mouth me anymore?
No, took care of those lessons. That was one of those good lessons, I think. We've had a lot of good lessons.
In 1981, Dale Inman took his teaching expertise to owner Rod Osterland and driver Dale Earnhardt. But car number 2 failed to make the grade.
We went about 6 months, and Rod Osterland, I guess, got in financial trouble somehow and sold the team. You're talking about a low time then, you know what I mean.
There weren't a lot of naysayers, but there was a little buzz about the fact that, well, how good would he have been without his cousin driving the race car? Well, he proved it in 1984.
Terry Labonte was a driver with a personality different from Richard Petty. But Dale re-engineered the success of the 43 with Team 44.
He was a real leader, and he wasn't a hands-on guy on everything on the car, but he had really good people that he depended on, and he knew if they were doing a good job or not, and that was his strong point. And a lot of guys in that position are afraid to hire people that are that talented around them because, they're insecure about it, but Dale wasn't.
This team they just rose to the occasion, and when we got down to the final stretch, the 5 or 6 races to go, we didn't have no team meetings, we didn't have nothing. They knew what they had to do, and we went out and done it, and that's the way, and we wound up winning the championship.
Great years with Terry. I think the only thing me and Terry fussed about was he was a big Cowboy fan, I was a big Redskin fan.
I've still got a $5 bill that he autographed for me when the Cowboys beat the Redskins 44-14.
It meant a lot for me. It showed that there wasn't all a petty deal. He can do it on his own.
Dale Inman, he's been here before, first time in New York, up on the front stage. Congratulations, Dale.
Thank you, Billy.
Dale's a very humble person, but I'm sure when he did leave, and I know how hard it was for him, he's talked to me about it when he left Petty Enterprise to move on, and then, to 3 years later capture the championship with a whole different group of guys, and Terry Labonte, a whole different driver, and to capture that 8th championship shows just what a leader Dale was.
That validated that Dale Inman was the greatest crew chief that ever lived.
With his 8th championship in hand, Dale's place in NASCAR history was secure. He had nothing left to prove, but one thing left to do.
He went his way and done his thing, and we went our way and done our thing, and then over a period of time, both of us sat down and said, we've been too much, too thin, and all this stuff, and we're getting we're getting a little bit older here. We're not doing as good. Let's just sort of get it all back together, try to enjoy the rest of our racing career together, and that's what we did. Everything just seemed to flow together. It was just easier and just felt more at home.
When Dale returned to Petty Enterprises in 1986, it wasn't about reaching victory lane. It was about the long road home to a place where racing will always be his livelihood, and every racetrack will feel like a homecoming.
I still enjoy going to the race. I talk to the drivers a little bit. I talk to the crew chiefs and see what's going on.
You ready?
Yeah.
I think we're pretty good, ain't we?
Not too bad.
Be patient and get through the first little bit.
That's the whole thing. We got both got two good cars.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Hey, Big John. The King.
I tell the old stories and they seem to enjoy it, you know what I mean?
You know any stories or any? I know you want a few.
I can't remember back that far.
Come on.
No, we used to run good here.
Always.
Always.
And to go through the garage even today and be respected by people that I don't even know, it makes me feel good.
He's going to run 25 laps, come in and check him for 15 this blessing.
I'm glad that Richard still lets me hang around with him.
You don't really see one without the other, you know, at the racetrack. You'll notice them up on top of the hauler. There's kind of like one.
They started going to the racetrack when they were 10 or 11 years old. And you know, they're both in their early to mid 70s now. So for 60-some years, that's all they've done. They don't know anything else.
My son's tried to get me to hit a golf ball. You know, heck, I can't hit a golf ball. There's no hobby, so what would I do? And I think as long as I can go and stay active, it's going to keep me from being a couch potato.
You know, he talks to everyone talks to him.
Hey, Raj. How you doing?
You don't come up there anymore with those guys.
If he sees something that he thinks is not like it should be, he'll bring it up.
You've got to come.
He's just Dale at the racetrack. That's where he's the most natural. That's where Richard enjoys having him, and I don't believe he'll be the type of guy that wakes up one morning and says, I don't want to do this anymore. I think he's going to do this forever.
You want to stay? Go home? No, I'm good. I think they run 120 laps. There's 140 to go.
They're just afraid to stay at home, is what it's all about. And that's what I tell them. I'm like, y'all are just afraid that you're going to miss something at the racetrack. Somebody's going to say something that you didn't hear.
That's the third time he ain't even close to the groove when he knocked him out of the gun.
That's their life. And that's what it says to me more than anything else. Racing was never a job to them. Racing was never a sport to them. It wasn't a hobby. It wasn't anything. It was their life. It was their lifestyle. It was their life. And just because you don't ride around in circles anymore, and just because you don't turn wrenches, doesn't mean you don't love it just as deeply and as passionately as you always did. And you don't want to let it go.
When you look at Petty Enterprises and Dale Inman, and you talk about the Petty way of doing things, it's something that's lasted for decades and decades and decades.
I think Dale developed a great work ethic from early on. Probably not many people know Dale Linden's never had a drink in his life, and not one drop. And I think that when you take someone that's been that dedicated to the sport of NASCAR as long as Dale has, and as many hours as he's put into it, and for myself and so many people in this garage, that he's helped get to where we're at in our careers. It all started with Dale Inman.
There's just so many people that's helped me fulfill this, you know what I mean? Without people standing behind me and believing in me and the work and the dedication that he put into it, it wouldn't happen. It just so happened that my name got to be the crew chief, and then the numbers that accumulated along with it, you know what I mean? It's been a struggling career, don't get me wrong, but it's been a long career. And I guess that's one thing that I'm most proud of, that I have seen it from the crude things that we've talked about to what it is today. It's just a lot of honors that's happened to me, and it's all of it's come through racing. We've been to a lot of places on account of racing, you know, and it don't make us a bit better than anybody else, but we've seen a lot of stuff just on account of racing. It's been a long ride, and it's certainly had its highs, and it certainly had a lot of lows, you know what I mean? So I guess that's part of life.
Richie Evans left an unforgettable impression on everyone he ever met, and on anyone who ever saw the orange number 61 run a modified race.
You're talking about a legend in a series. He owned that modified series.
He knew when he came to town that he was going to be the man to beat. And the record that he set is just unbelievable.
Grassroots, you know, hard-nosed racer that worked on his cars, built his cars. You know, here he is in the Hall of Fame. That's, you know, that's a cool thing.
He come to Barnesville and tore their hind up and went to Winston and blew them away over there. Now, I'll tell you, he put on a show for him. He one of the best race drivers I ever seen.
He was a fascinating character, one of those rare people who wins a lot of races and yet never loses an ounce of popularity.
If you have to name one guy that has been instrumental in the modified series, people are gonna say Richie Evans. He was what Dale Earnhardt and Richard Petty are to the Cup Series. That's what Richie was to modifieds.
He had that John Wayne type of cool. You knew he was good. He knew he was good, but he wasn't cocky, and he was a guy's guy, a driver's driver.
People will come in this world, and when we're all gone, and have success and win all these races, but you're never ever going to replace Richie Evans.
Here is Evans, whom the press tab is overwhelming favorite.
9 times he won the NASCAR Modified Championship.
Evans gets the fight off the fourth turn. Evans now moves up along the outside. It is Evans, the defending national NASCAR Modified champion, Richie Evans.
Telling stories around the campfire at the track. It's one of the best rituals of racing, especially for those who spent their lives in and around the sport. These are the friends and family of Richie Evans, and they know how much Richie liked people around him to have fun.
He greased a pole and put $500 on the top of it. It was his first pig roast. He said, "Lynn, you got to go out there and get the girls going. Get the girls climbing that." I said, "Oh, God." I didn't bring clothes to wear, but he was an instigator, that's for sure.
Stories about Richie Evans' amazing life come easy to anyone who knew him. He grew up in upstate New York, but this pastoral landscape didn't appeal to Richie's love of speed, and he made his mark on a place with a few more cars and people. A town called Rome.
Richie Evans was a real Roman. You know, he was born here. He worked here. He started his mechanic business here, and then he branched out into modified racing, and he's an icon. This particular city is a very safe city. Blue-collar, hard-working people. They weren't given anything. That's what you have in upstate New York. And agriculture was always a big facet of upstate.
Ernie and Sadie Evans owned a small dairy farm in Westernville, New York. Agriculture demands a strong work ethic, which Ernie instilled into his children, Rich and Sandy.
We had a small farm in comparison to today, 30, 40 cows. We had a couple horses. We raised some calves from the cows. Because my father was so conservative, he did make money on it because he was conservative and saved. He was, you know, in fact, they never had a checkbook until my father died. It was cash. My brother would buy used tractors, equipment. He would go to these auctions, get them, bring them home, check them out, fix them, and usually he took care of them, and they didn't usually break down in the field because he would always be repairing them in advance.
Even then, Rich and the high school yearbook staff knew he would put his love of cars to use in the near future. He soon said bye-bye to the farm. Rich worked on hot rods and raced just for fun, and he worked at a service station to pay for it.
Early on, your dad, he worked in a couple different gas stations for a man named Joe Jones. And, he was a street racer and a drag racer back then.
Pretty good street racer, though, right?
Utica Rome Speedway came along in 1960. It was built, and in 61 they started racing. And that was very local for Richie. He was a guy who had done some drag racing, both organized and unorganized. Some friends of his, over time, just told him that, you know, if you'd go over to Utica Rome and try running a stock car, you can actually get paid for this. You know, it'd be more than running for pink slips. You know, you could get a trophy, you can get some cash, and he did it. You know, and by all accounts was kind of not very good at the start.
We went to Utica Rome Speedway one night, and he says, you know what? I think I'd like to start racing. I says, oh, come on, you know, you're doing so good at drag racing. What do you mean you want to start racing? And he says, yeah, I want to start. So went to Utica Rome, and he was not even of age. He was 18 years old at the time. He had to be 21, and he got in somehow. I don't remember exactly how he got in, but he started racing.
Richie and Barbara married and started a family, and he bought his own gas station in Rome. But he kept racing with whatever resources he could find.
Your dad was a low-dollar racer back then and trying to save money any way he could, and came time to paint the car, and just seems to be there was a story that there happened to be some Department of Public Works orange laying around, and somehow it ended up at your father's shop, and the car got painted that color.
It is true. Oh, yeah, it's a true story.
The details are foggy, but they apparently had an inside man at the town highway garage in Rome, the city garage.
Through conversation and people he knew, he was able to secure some of that at a low cost for his race car.
I've tried hard to figure out exactly who it was that got the paint, but somehow the paint ended up in Richie's hands, and his cars were basically a municipal snowplow orange from then on.
Them old school guys, man, they won't say that they, you know, it just happened to show up.
It just happened to show up at the shop, and it just happened to get on the race car.
It just happened to be the same color as the snowplows in the city of Rome, which is...
and I think he got a kick out of the, you know, the hooligan nature of that. You know, it's he wasn't shy about telling the story. He just wasn't going to implicate whoever it was that got him the paint. He won the last feature of the year at Utica Rome in 1965, which was his first modified victory of any kind. You know, it wasn't that long after that, 67, 68. You know, he didn't put up the huge numbers he did later on, but you could see the win totals growing every year. And I think it was all just a matter of figuring out the cars, and that helped him refine whatever natural ability he had. You know, and obviously he had a lot.
Around the campfire, the friends and family of Richie Evans talk about how much modified racing has changed.
He'd be disappointed if he had to run the tour the way it is today, because it's down to 12 or 14 races. When he ran for the championship, we ran 80, 90 races a year and traveled all over the country, Canada to Florida. And the way the tour is now, your father would be sad if he saw it the way it is now, and I'm sure he would try to change it.
The modified series has taken its lumps, you know, through the years, and now you rush to get to the races, you watch the race, you go home. You know, back then it was an all-day event. You know, there was 100 cars showing up. There was a lot of things going on, a lot of stories, and it's totally different now. I don't think that the young fan gets a grasp on anything right now of what the modifieds meant back then.
Modified racing has definitely changed since then. They raced as a living. They were racing 3, some 4 times a week. Now it's definitely more of a hobby.
There's 10, 12 cars that tries to run all the races, and we usually have somewhere between 16 to 20 cars at a normal race.
The modifieds are still just that. They're called a modified. They're
you're allowed to modify them.
They're open wheels, they have Nerf bars, they're 2 inches off the ground. Our tires are 15-inch wide tires. The engines are the 18-degree engine. That's what the Cup cars run 7-8 years ago to keep our cost a little lower.
Per race, you're going to spend anywhere from $25,000 to $6,000. 95% of them pay $2,000 to win and fall off from there, $1,500 per second, so on and so forth. It is, for lack of a better word, a losing proposition. You could go out and win a race, but it's still going to be very, very difficult to pay your expense for that race.
I don't think anyone in the Southern Modified is making a living racing. We're all doing this for the fun of the sport. The young drivers are doing it to use as a stepping stone into future things. I'm doing it because I love to race.
Modified racing is definitely like no other form of racing. It's a lifestyle.
The lifestyle of a modified racer was different when Richie Evans ran. He used to run a lot more races, some that NASCAR sanctioned, and some they didn't.
We were running Utica Rome Speedway, which was NASCAR, and there was a track about an hour away, Fulton, which was not NASCAR, and your dad got in a little trouble for running that race.
If you ran a non-NASCAR race on the same day as a NASCAR race in your area, and you were a NASCAR member, you were liable to get suspended. And Utica Rome rained out on a Sunday, and Richie and a bunch of other guys ended up going to Fulton Speedway, which was, I guess, 50 or 60 miles away, and running a non-NASCAR race.
But a lot of guys used to do that. They'd put watercolor on their car, change the numbers, run under false names and everything, and then run back to Utica Rome. But your dad ended up winning the race.
Richie won the race. Jerry Cook was second. Lou Lazaro was third. Richie got thrown out. Jerry Cook didn't. Lou Lazaro didn't.
He was the only guy that was suspended, even though a bunch of guys had gone up there. But, you know, he won the race. He was the most visible guy.
Came down to Utica Rome the next week, and they wouldn't let him in the pits. And they says, you're fined and you're suspended because you ran an outlaw track. Well, your dad didn't want to pay the fine, so he ended up running outlaw for a while.
It didn't necessarily hurt his racing any, because he ended up running a lot of non-NASCAR tracks throughout New York, Western New York, and winning a lot of races. And some people say that those were the years in which he got better, because the cars in Western New York back then, they weren't NASCAR tracks, so you could kind of do more things, be more creative.
Meantime, he had Eddie Flemke drive his backup car at Utica Rome and Albany, Saratoga, which were NASCAR tracks, while your dad ran somewhere else. And Eddie was winning races with your dad's car.
One car would go east, one car would go west. And Richie'd call me on Friday night, say, how'd we do? I said, well, we won. How'd you do? He says, well, we had a good day.
At the end of 1970, they show up at Utica Rome for the New Yorker 400, biggest race of the year at that place. But Richie had nothing to run that night, so he came with the car, and they wouldn't let him in the pits. He was suspended from NASCAR. You're not walking into the pits.
So your dad says, well, that's all right. We're going to pit the car outside in the parking lot. So they did. They pitted the car out in the parking lot, and every time they went, Eddie took the car in, he'd show his pit pass to the gate man, and he'd go in, practice, come back out.
You know, it had to maybe frost NASCAR a little bit to have their bad guy not only winning and still being in the headlines, but his car, you know, his orange car was still winning at the places he was thrown out of.
And he won, right?
Eddie ended up winning.
Eddie won.
Yes, Eddie won that race too. That was something. Those outlaw days. Thank God they made up and got back in good graces with NASCAR.
Those good graces got a little help when Richie mentioned the right to work laws of the state of New York. Evans returned with something to prove.
Came back at the end of '71 for the New Yorker 400. He told the writer Pete Zanardi later on, I've never wanted to win a race so bad. That it was his first time back, and he was at the local racetrack, and just obliterated the field. There were no I told you so's or I got you or anything like that, but I think he liked the idea that victory kind of made a statement. He didn't win by a nose, he won by a lot, and it's like, hey, I'm back.
Soon after Richie's return, the 61 car got a new sponsor. Gene DeWitt owned a construction company. He saw something special in that racer from Rome.
The one thing is the fella doesn't know the word "it can't be done." He's his ambition, he lives, eats, dreams, drinks, racing, and when you put that much energy into anything, whether racing or playing poker, you're going to win.
B.R. DeWitt sponsored the number 61 from then on. With Gene's support, Richie Evans was about to rewrite the record books of modified racing.
Richie Evans still owns the lead. Stevens is second. Don Worley in number 45 is running third, and these boys fight it out through every corner.
Richie Evans knew that the only way to become a champion racer was through hard work from his crew and from himself.
He was always working on cars. You'd go by there at midnight, the gas station would be closed, but the lights would be on in the service bay, and your dad'd be working on his hot rod.
He was the best mechanic in the city of Rome. He worked on his race cars 7 days a week, every single day. That's what made him so good.
I mean, you got there in the morning and you worked all day, and after supper it was back at the garage, and nothing happened until that race car was ready to go to the races. And it was ready to go when it was loaded on the trailer.
He could diagnose anything, work on anything.
He could figure out anything. He was a great mechanic.
He was pretty good with the tires and the carburetors too, though.
I think that was one of his big advantages, is he could read tires as well as he could. He would send me back in the shop, back where we stored the tires, and say, go get this tire I ran at Spencer or something, you know, a month ago. And I go back there and, God, they all look basically the same. Yeah. And he'd walk back there and he says, that one right there.
There's no man working at my garage an hour that I'm not there working with him. So I think that makes the guys work better, and I just don't pop in the garage and say, why the heck didn't you do this or that, you know. I think they feel that if I'm that committed, they should be that committed, and I think it makes everything work better.
Their commitment allowed Richie and the crew to challenge their biggest rival, the number 38 car, Jerry Cook, the reigning modified champion.
He saw what I was doing, and he wanted a piece of that too. So then it became what was called in Rome, New York, the crosstown rivalry.
Jerry Cook and Richie did a lot of decoy work. They would send one car and truck in one direction. If you went out of town a certain way to go to one track, you had to drive right by Cook's shop. And they'd say, all right, well, there goes Richie's truck. You know, they'd make a show of beeping the horn, and, oh, there goes Richie's truck. They must be going to run up here. Well, it turns out they were running somewhere else, and Jerry might pull in there, and there's Richie. Well, the other car was a dummy. And Cookie did it to them, too. I mean, it was a cat-and-mouse game. I mean, who would do something like that anymore? You know, today you look at the schedule, and it is what it is, and there's 20 races or 18, whatever it is, and that's where you go. You know, back then there were 90 races. Every race that was a NASCAR-sanctioned race paid points. And to try to outfox each other and get a couple more in was part of the deal.
The stories that everybody's heard about sending one truck out of town going west and making a big circle around and coming east is all true. There was one night when I flew down south and ran a race at Hickory during the week, and my wife went to Fonda for a midweek race, and Richie was there, and Richie asked her where I was, and she looked at her watch. She says, probably starting a feature about right now down in Hickory.
After all was said and done, the number 61 prevailed. In 1973, Richie Evans and his loyal, dedicated crew won their first NASCAR Modified Championship.
You were a unit. You were a tight-knit group, and everybody watched out for everybody.
The loyalty that he had with the people that worked with him and knew him. It was almost a pact, a unification. It was like a fraternity.
He'd bring the best out of you, and mean, that's just another one of them talents, man.
He also knew, you work hard and you play hard, and we worked and accomplished what he wanted to get accomplished, and then we could relax.
We worked hard, we played hard. That was part of the deal.
Prepared before the race, partied after the race.
We were always accused of being, big partiers, but most of our partying didn't start till midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning.
There was always a little reward, just like you'd always keep some alcoholic beverages in the refrigerator at the shop for the free help. There was always a little reward at the end of the day.
But Oswego, when we were running second, and Billy was on the radio, he was freaking, he was ticked off. And he's yelling, pass him, you know you can pass him, why aren't you passing this guy? Richie didn't say nothing, and because at that time, he used to get a 6-pack a lap for running second. And Richie got back on the radio and he said, a 6-pack a lap. And that's all he said. We came home with a truckload of beer.
Yeah. Well, he could have been getting $10 a lap for leading. Instead, he's sitting there second collecting 6-packs.
Yeah. Never mind the lap money. We got beer.
Ray, do you remember what he made you do at Daytona?
There was a lot of things he made me do. Which one?
I think we'd gone down for one of his championships, and NASCAR provided a bus for all of us to go. And then when we got to Daytona, because you're a non-drinker, he designated you to be the driver of this 12-passenger or 16-passenger van.
Yeah. And, and we're driving along the beach. He wanted to see somebody that would get busted. He's yelling and screaming out the door. We were doing the weave pattern on the beach, remember? The door's wide open. So finally the cop cars come right in front of us. And the cop gets out, license and registration. I give him the papers, and he looks at me, and he goes to me, aren't you a little old to be doing this kind of stuff? And he says, I stopped you because of that loudmouth over there.
Richie loved to talk, freely gave advice on racing and equipment, even to guys who were about to compete against him.
He wasn't a guy that he felt that he was better than anybody. If somebody needed help, he would be the first guy to help. If you asked him a question, he'd probably not answer it fully, but he would, get you in the right direction where you needed to be.
He was free with his help. He'd help anybody. He'd help his biggest competitor if he needed it. He loved to help young drivers. Sometimes to my personal not liking, he'd walk right over to the car and do this, do that. Look, this is the spring we got in here or that. I'm going, why are you telling him that?
Billy used to get mad at him for, giving away setups and stuff. And Richie's theory was, I'd rather race somebody that was fast than somebody you don't know where they're going to land when they hit the corner,
I think the car was capable tonight. The old master beat me himself.
Let's have a handshake here first, and we'll get a little more conversation in with both of them.
One thing I want to say, so many times when the chips were down, this guy has helped me out an awful lot. I'm an independent, and so many times he's loaned me stuff and given me good advice. Tonight he gave me some good advice on a tire. I can't thank him enough. The guy is really a super racer. He's the guy that makes racing what it is today. He's the guy you got to beat. And damn, I'll tell you, he's one tough competitor. And a good friend of mine. Thanks a lot, Richie. Proud to be beat by you.
In 1975, Richie stopped running for NASCAR championships. He still raced full-time, but his attention was focused on a new series.
He lost the title in '74, but I don't think that chased him away. There was a new circuit forming in upstate New York called NERA, N-E-A-R-A, which was an organization that was good on paper, but they seemed to do everything wrong, and they only lasted a couple of years. But I think the part of it that looked good on paper to Richie was it was a small amount of travel. You didn't have to run to Virginia every other week and didn't have to go into Connecticut or Massachusetts every week. I think he liked the idea of doing it, staying close to home and still winning a lot of races that paid pretty good.
But Richie couldn't stay away from NASCAR for long. It wasn't money that drew him back. It was the success of his old crosstown rival.
It bothered Richie that at the end of the year you might be in a tavern in Rome and somebody would say, boy, that's something about Jerry Cook winning another NASCAR national title. I think he probably maybe just heard it once too many. He and Gene DeWitt decided before '78 that they were going to run for it again.
Once again, the Orange 61 was a fixture at NASCAR point races, and the Rapid Roman became a fixture in Victory Lane. But now he was even better than before. 1978 began one of the best eras that any racer has ever had at any level. Richie won race after race any way he could.
The exciting race at Martinsville with Jeff Bodine, that was the end of that race, was absolutely the most exciting thing.
On this particular day, I'd already won the late model race. It was first, and had a fast car for the modified race.
They didn't like each other because both of them used to win a lot.
The Rapid Roman gave me a little tap going into turn one, but I survived, didn't hit anything.
Bodine gathers it back in. Evans goes underneath him as Evans took advantage of a sideways move.
But it put me behind, but, you know, pretty determined.
When they started banging and beating each other, and I mean racing, I mean hard.
Down the back straightaway, we're coming to get the white flag. He put the bumper to me and knocked me up high and out of the groove.
I looked at my dad, I said, there's going to be a big wreck coming off of 4 on this last lap, you watch.
Going into turn 3, I caught it. It was amazing. I don't know how I went that fast, but I caught him going into turn 3. So I put the bumper to him and had him crossed up. I mean, there was no way he was going to win this race. I was going to beat him.
Off the turn, sideways goes Evans. Here comes Bodine, they bump. Bodine is in the wall. Evans high on the wall. He crosses the line first.
I was right there behind it all. Darn it, they both made it over the line. There wasn't much left, but they both crossed the line, so it was nothing but a pile of junk laying there when I got there.
Of course, everyone in the place, all the crew members, all the drivers, all the fans, thought, well, this is going to be one heck of a fight. When they get out of those cars, they're going to charge each other and just go at it. We looked down at each other probably about 100 yards away and just kind of smiled. We had respect.
Last lap, can you tell us what happened?
He got crossed up in the corner, and I got outside of him, and he see me coming and just drove me into the wall. You know, the man just doesn't know how to lose.
Richie, you're counting the last lap.
So I got around him there, and he tried to just cut right into me and wreck me before I even got to the finish line.
But you're okay, Richie?
Oh, yeah. As long as you win, you're okay.
They had to tow the car into winner's circle, and his car is all beat up and smoking, and he just got that Richie Evans smile, you know. It's just beat Jeff Bodine, and I won another Martinsville race.
He won everywhere in every way. From 1978 through 1981, the 61 ran more than 300 races and won more than half. Through 1985, Richie Evans and his guys took 18 track championships and every single NASCAR modified championship for 8 straight years.
Evans on the outside. Look at Evans. Evans on the outside. Comes from 5th into the lead. Evans caught the green and went for it, and he got it. Evans with a fabulous move on the outside.
Rich was at the top of his game and was having fun doing it. He was a racer's racer. If he could run 7 nights a week, Ray, you know that, we'd be running 7 nights a week. He loved the competition.
And he competed against the biggest names in stock car racing. The superspeedway modified races at Daytona attracted the stars of the Cup Series, including Bobby Allison, Neil Bonnet, and Darrell Waltrip. In 1978, Richie went to Florida determined to beat the best.
We looked at the rules and we said, man, you take a Camaro and slick that bad boy up, you would have quite the aerodynamic advantage. We had such a huge advantage over everybody else because we had a car like nobody else's. And so we won that race handily. I think Richie run second in that one.
Back then it was always you run second and then slingshot the guy in the end. We finished second to Darrell Waltrip under a caution.
Richie was not about to let a poorly timed caution impact his chance of winning in 1979.
They dropped the green flag and all you seen was that orange car leaving, 2 black marks. I mean, he didn't run second for nothing. He just got out there and run away with it.
They blew away the Daytona field in 1979 and in 1980. Despite his success on the big track, Richie never ran a single race in NASCAR's Cup Series.
You know, I don't have a crystal ball. I can't tell what Richie's career might have been if he'd moved up to Cup. Richie just didn't seem to like that. He was very content, very happy racing those modifieds around the short tracks all over the East Coast.
He didn't have to because the Cup stuff was just starting to grow back then, and there wasn't a lot of money in it. And the stuff that he was doing, the money he was making when he was winning the championships and winning all the races, you know, he's racing 4, 5, 6 times a week. You know, and he'd win half of them, 3/4 of them every week, so he was making a good living.
On the line with us from Rome, New York, Richie Evans. How come you never, in light of all your successes, decide to pick up and move south and run for even bigger dollars?
Well, I never got into a situation where I thought that I could afford it until probably I was mid-30s, and I just felt then it was not the time to go waste 2, 3, 4 years to get going and then have 4 or 5 years left, you know.
There was a half a dozen good teams. Today there's a lot of good teams. It made a lot of sense for him to stay where he was at.
I would dare say that Petty's title and Earnhardt's would have been in trouble if he would have decided to go down there, because he was passionate about winning. I mean, no matter what it was, whether it was racing or if he was playing foosball for who was buying supper that night, you know, and we was, you know, out. He only played to win.
Rural upstate New York seems far away from the racetrack. Richie Evans found peace from his busy life here at a place he partly owned, the Freeman Hotel. Recently, his youngest daughter, Tara, took over.
It is where my childhood memories started with my father. I've always known it as a place that he loved to get away. And he didn't have a phone up here or cable. It was just his way to get away. And if anybody wanted to find him, they would just have to drive up here.
He used to bring a lot of his race car buddies up here. Have a big old pig roast and party. Party at Hardy.
They would have all kinds of parties up here. New Year's parties, Halloween, pig roast, you name it. They've probably celebrated it up here.
This was Richie's deal. He really loved it up here. He wanted to sit here and have a cocktail and watch the cars go by. Just relax. He wasn't going to have no telephones. If they want to talk to me, they can come up here.
I think he didn't need the elaborate life. He just needed to relax. He had another family, my brother and I, an ex-wife, and my mother, who was a flight attendant, who was gone for 2, 3, 4 nights a week. There was a lot of juggling, I think.
Hi, Richie. Gonna watch your dad?
Attention was a tough thing to do when time was minimal.
He did do his best at making time for us the best way he knew how, I believe. But as far as an everyday thing or every weekend, no.
There was a lot of pressure on him. I don't know how much longer he would have went on racing. I think he would have done another couple of years, but I guess I'd like to think that he would have started to thinking about doing something different. Still in racing, I think he wanted to slow down.
But he never got the chance. In 1985, Richie and the number 61 were still going strong.
1985, Richie was really fast. It was the first year of what's now known as the NASCAR Whelen Modified Tour. It was a 28-race schedule that first year, and as different guys shook out in the points chase, Richie ended up kind of pulling out again, and he clinched the title in the second to the last race of the year, which was at Thompson, Connecticut.
Joining us now from Rome, New York, a man who wrapped up his 8th straight NASCAR modified title and his 9th championship overall, Richie Evans. You fellas get set to head to Martinsville. Was it any more difficult or any easier this year as compared to the past?
There was like 10 cars that were chasing the points this year, where in other years it would get narrowed down to 2 or 3 near the end of the season. So we're probably a little more proud of the one this year.
Richie, get in the truck and head on down to Martinsville. We'll see you in a couple of days.
Thanks, Eli, and let's hope we can handle this down there.
We already had clinched the championship, so there was really no pressure for that particular race other than go out and try and win it.
I remember that morning. Tara was there right with me when Dad came. We were staying at the neighbor's getting watched, and before he got on the plane, he showed up there before he went to school, and he got on his knee and he told both me and Tara that he loved us, and he'd never come to the babysitters and tell us that, and that was the first time he did it. He told us he loved us, go to school, he'll see us when he gets back.
It was kind of a strange day. Rich flew down, usually rode down with us in the truck. Anyway, we got down there, and Thursday morning we got in the racetrack, got the car unloaded and everything, and one of the first things we used to do when we get to the track is go locate the tires that we were going to race. That particular morning we couldn't get tires. They hadn't arrived yet, which was, all right, I know your dad, you know, how he was with tires. That would concern him. So we were talking, boy, he's not going to be happy when he gets here. He showed up. He seemed to be in a good mood. And I told him that we couldn't get the tires yet. And I was surprised it didn't really bother him all that much. Kind of strange. He just seemed to be, don't worry about it. Strange weekend, and then he went out and practiced.
I remember hitting the wall, and he ended up going into turn 3, and the car stopped in turn 4. And
we got to the car, we knew it was bad.
You know, we were all trying to get equipment, saws and hacksaws, anything to get him cut out of the car.
Went to the hospital. Kenny and I sat in the room for about an hour before we called Lynn because we just couldn't bring ourselves to do it. And the track kept telling us to make the call because they needed to make an announcement, and it was the hardest thing I ever do in my life.
I came in the house and the phone was ringing. I wasn't going to answer it. I didn't recognize the voice. It was very quiet, and then I all of a sudden realized after about 3 Lynn's that it was William, and he gave me the news. I kind of hated you that very moment, I really did, and I kind of let out a scream because I thought, why? I told my mother, why would he say something so awful to me? But now I was worried about the kids, all the kids, so I called Richard's ex-wife.
The phone rang, it was Lynn telling me that she had some bad news, and from then I just called my daughter. She was in Florida. Told her. I called Janelle. She was living with her boyfriend at the time.
And the phone rang, and it was my mother, and I couldn't tell whether she was laughing, hysterically laughing over something good, or she was hysterical because of something bad, and it was the bad.
Even though it was a pre-cell phone era, you know, quickly word got around, and it was a massive, you know, people would call you during the day, and no caller ID, so, you know, hello. And there'd be somebody crying on the other end of the phone, you know, and it was a guy crying, you know, and so you didn't have to say, well, geez, I wonder if he knows, you know. They were either calling to see if you knew, or they were calling to discuss it.
At first, I didn't want to believe it, you know. Man, it was kind of devastating. I still don't believe it today.
The whole racing industry was truly saddened when we all received the unfortunate news of the death of National Modified Champion Richie Evans.
Richie's 9th championship was his last. For his family and for the entire sport, Richie's loss changed everything.
It was a huge turning point. A lot of things changed after that. The tour, modified tour, was just getting started at that point, and we lost our leader. So someone else had to take that point, and there really wasn't anybody else.
What about the future for Richie Evans? It's been a lot of years in this business for you. Do you have any foreshadowing as to what might happen down the road, or are you just going to keep at it in the same pace? Or?
Yeah, I'm just going to start out in the spring with 2 new cars instead of 2 old cars. That's the only change I see.
Excellent. That's excellent. Thank you very much. Got enough?
In 2011 at Loudon, New Hampshire, the owner of Tommy Baldwin Racing paid tribute to Richie Evans' induction to the Nascar Hall of Fame with that familiar orange paint scheme.
You know, it was good to get his name back out there and let everybody know who he was, and I think it made a lot of people look up Richie and find out where it was about, and, you know, got him a lot more known with the fan of today. It's been really an honor for us to, you know, do the Hall of Fame Richie card, you know, honor a guy that we all looked up to.
Well, I'm on the voting panel for the NASCAR Hall of Fame, and I purposely brought his name up in our last meeting, and I said we need to look at some of the guys in other divisions other than Sprint Cup, and Richie Evans is certainly a guy that put the numbers up there, that he well deserves to be in the Hall of Fame.
The guys all knew that it was coming on, so they turned it on and watched the first couple, and maybe not this year, no big deal. And I walked away while they did the video, and then I heard them getting ready to announce the next one, so I walk back up to the plate, and they said it, and everybody was, I mean, it was just, I don't know. Words can't explain what I felt.
When he was elected to the NASCAR Hall of Fame, previous nominees made it clear.
Richie Evans will join the Hall of Fame.
Richie Evans was a welcome member of their ranks, even though he never raced at the Cup level.
He's the only guy that I ever seen come down here and stir up all these short track drivers like he did. He come to Martinsville and tore their hiney up and went to Winston and blew them away over there. Now, I'll tell you, he put on a show for him. He's one of the best race drivers I ever seen.
One of my fondest memories is going to Martinsville and watching those modified races and watching Richie race up there, and you talking about a legend in a series. He owned that modified series, 9-time champion, won races everywhere he went, a perfect nominee for the Hall of Fame.
He just was he was what Dale Earnhardt and Richard Petty are to the Cup Series. That's what Richie was to modifieds.
Richie Evans is the essence of stock car racing to guys like me, the grassroots, guys that have never had a chance to rub elbows with the Allisons and Pearsons and Pettys and Yarboroughs. Richie was that guy.
The modified division deserved to be represented in the Hall of Fame. I'm proud that the modified division and Richie are being represented.
He raced anything, everything, and won that many championships. That's credentials right there to be in the NASCAR Hall of Fame.
More than 25 years later, the loss of Richie Evans is still felt by the series that he loved and by the people that loved him.
Richie Evans is and ever will be one of the best drivers there ever was.
I couldn't be any more proud for my division than for Richie Evans to be honored in the Hall of Fame.
You hate to ever say a guy was invincible, but in that stretch of time, he was as close as it came to invincible. He was one of those rare people who wins a lot of races and yet never loses an ounce of popularity.
It's so hard when you're living with a legend. You don't know that. The little things that he did away from the racetrack, away from the bars, helped a lot of people.
We're very proud of what my father accomplished. Would never think to take any of that away from him. Absolutely 120% deserving.
I think he got the respect that he deserved. I don't think a lot of people respect the class he came from, the modified drivers, the hard work that they put into what they did. I think it's an honor to see his name on that TV that day, that's all.
If something's brought up within, topics, and somebody doesn't know who Richie Evans is, I turn to him and I tell them to just go home and Google his name because it is amazing. And I never took his, I I guess I don't walk around bragging about who he was. I'd rather somebody say, hey, your dad was one hell of a guy.
He was just rich. He just did his thing. He lived his life. And that's what you saw is what you got.
I have good memories and bad memories. To this day, I think of Richie often. I still have feelings for the man.
He was the love of my life. He gave me 2 beautiful children. He gave me a good life. I think we cried on each other's shoulders, William. I think we both felt the pain.
He was my best friend, a great person to work with, somebody I admired, and a tragic loss, something I've struggled to cope with forever, still today, and it's nice to know that he's being remembered. I was hoping he'd get in someday, just didn't think it'd be this soon.
The new kid in town. The future looks bright for this youngster.
Waltrip from Franklin, Tennessee takes the lead.
No, and of course it's a very tight little racetrack. There's not a lot of room for anything to go wrong.
Darrell Waltrip.
Darrell Waltrip.
Darrell Waltrip.
Darrell Waltrip.
Darrell Waltrip wins. What a streak that team is on.
Oh, won the Daytona 500. Won the Daytona 500.
When I decided that I was going to retire in 2000, it was bittersweet. I didn't end up my career the way I wanted to.
And Walter brings the car in, you can hear the engine misfiring, and there's a lot of smoke. It's more than a plug wire, I'm afraid.
Darrell Waltrip gets hard into the wall.
Waltrip sweated it out just to get into this race.
New fans that had started to follow in the sport in the 90s never got to see me when I was at my best. Matter of fact, they never even got to see me when I was just mediocre. They didn't know who Darrell Waltrip was. There were people that didn't know Darrell Waltrip won 7 races in a row at Bristol or 5 Coke 600s or any of those things. 75 was a darn good year for us. We were really, really competitive in my own car. It was number 17, orange and white, terminal transport. And we came here to Nashville, and it was a Mother's Day weekend. My grandmother, my grandfather, all my family came down here for the big races. Couple laps we took the lead, and that was my first cup win, and it was so cool. The picture that I have, it's my whole family, my mom, my dad, and Michael standing down at the front corner of the car, my grandmother, my grandfather. And the interesting thing about my grandmother being there was she really was the reason why that I ever even thought about racing. There were 5 of us kids, and we didn't have a lot of money. My grandfather was a deputy sheriff in Owensboro, and he worked traffic on the weekends for the races. My grandmother would bring me to the races with her to keep her company. She didn't like sitting in the grandstand by herself. I'm a little guy, 6, 7 years old. Those cars fascinated me. Take that thing down there, throw it sideways. Wah, wah, wah. And I told my grandmother, you know, Granny, one day, that's what I want to do. One day I'm going to be a race car driver. Mom worked at the IGA, and my dad drove a Pepsi-Cola truck. He was a route salesman for Pepsi-Cola, so I'd help my dad in the summertime when school was out. There was a hardware store in Owensboro where I grew up. They sold go-karts. Every time for the next few weeks, we'd stop by there to deliver Pepsi-Colas, and there sat that go-kart. They had it on the showroom floor. I'd go over and I'd sit on that thing, and I had this vision. I had this vision of me winning the world's biggest go-kart race. Nobody in my family had ever raced before. It wasn't like I'd inherited something. The guy that owned the hardware store, he said, Leroy, that's my dad's name, he said, you got to get that boy a go-kart. I'll sell it to you on credit. When it came to the Waltrip family, that was us. We didn't care how much it cost, we just wanted to know how much a month is it. I had a big race at the fairgrounds in Louisville, and we took that go-kart to that race. You would have thought I'd ridden a go-kart my whole life. I hopped on that thing, and if everybody else was going around that track in 15 seconds, I was going around that track in 13 seconds. But my poor brothers and sisters sacrificed a lot so I could race my go-kart, so I could work on my racing career. And I know all of them at the time maybe thought it was a little bit over the top for us to be doing what we were doing. And so when I look at that picture of my first win right down here in Victory Circle, and who's standing in there as proud as she could possibly be, was my grandmother. Because it wasn't too long after that she passed away, but I was always so grateful that she got to see me win my first race.
Darrell Waltrip, the new young tiger of NASCAR racing.
Darrell Waltrip certainly is the man to watch this year.
Receives the checkered flag and first place, Waltrip.
Darrell Waltrip clinches his second straight national driving title.
Darrell Waltrip has just walked all over this field tonight.
I didn't have to work at driving. It was a natural thing for me to do. I had a talent and I didn't even know I had it. I was racing in Owensboro and winning every week. Little racetracks teach you car control, throttle control, finesse. You're not going 200 miles an hour, so you got time to absorb more, learn more. It got to be too easy. There was not any competition there for me anymore. So I needed a challenge, and my next challenge I felt like was here at the fairgrounds in Nashville. This racetrack had an incredible reputation.
They come from the city, the farm, and the mountains for the one day of the year when the NASCAR driving stars come to Nashville. This is live action on this July 25th, 1970.
If you could win a race at Nashville, you got national recognition. Ended up leaving Owensboro, moving down to Franklin, Tennessee to go to work for a man named P.B. Crowell, and he had won the track championship here, and he had the best cars, and he knew this racetrack, and he hired me to drive for him.
My dad always told me, and it's always the deal, always play with somebody better than you are, because you can learn something from them, and that's where Darrell was when he come in.
Darrell couldn't have picked a racetrack any better than the fairgrounds there in Nashville. It was slick, hard to manage, and just having the fastest car was not going to win your race.
The old racetrack that I started on was a lot like Darlington. It was narrow. It was kind of a one-groove racetrack. You'd go in and go right up to the top of the banking.
It had real high bank right dead in the middle of the corner. So you went in, you had to run at the wall and turn and come off the wall, because you couldn't just go around and make a circle.
Some of the worst wrecks probably ever been caused here at the fairgrounds. I caused them. But I learned, and I learned fast. Mr. Donahoe, the promoter here, he wanted to change the track because he couldn't pass. It was hard to race on. So he wanted to change it around, make it a little more exciting. So he decided he was going to have the highest banked short track in America. He banked this thing up to 36 degrees.
And there you see the roller coaster at the state fairgrounds here. This racetrack is something like a roller coaster in its own right, with these 35-degree banked turns.
When the track was banked as sharply as it was,
You look through that windshield in the corner, you can't see very far ahead of you. So you've got to sharpen your reflexes. That's what Nashville really teaches a race driver how to do.
Some of the top-notch drivers refuse to either race there or never really adapted to the racetrack like Darrell did.
Once they built that track with the big banks, I mean, he just is like an old comfortable pair of shoes. He just put a hurting on everybody week after week.
I'd watched enough races that I knew exactly what to do. I mean, it just came to me. It was so fast and so high banked that we couldn't have a weekly show here. And that's what this joint really was known for back in the day, was weekly racing. So I think the banks now are 18, 20 degrees, something like that. And that's the track you see here now.
I firmly believe that Darrell's early experiences here at Nashville is, as much as anything, one of, if not the compelling reason why he was so successful on the NASCAR Cup circuit.
Experiencing those different configurations, like I said, that first one, like Darlington. Went to Darlington, I was like, Darlington didn't scare me one bit.
Darrell Waltrip, one of the youngsters, one of the bright newcomers to automobile racing. He has to be patient. He has to discipline himself, and that is one of the tough things to do. You're in traffic again. Waltrip going down low. He's got him.
That took some real nerve to do that. And Waltrip, the big man at Nashville Speedways every Saturday night, is out in front.
And then I went to Bristol. And I said, man, this racetrack here at Bristol just like running a home in Nashville.
I'd sit there at a place like Bristol and watch the stopwatches in total amazement, how he could click off a lap after lap after lap and only vary a couple of tenths each lap.
Far and away, his #1 all-time greatest accomplishment was winning 7 in a row at Bristol.
Darrell Waltrip will win his 5th in a row.
6 races in a row.
7th time in a row.
It screamed volumes on the talent level of Darrell. Could he have done it without his background here in Nashville? I'm going to say probably not.
All the guys that came up in the Carolinas, you know, they had Hickory and they had Martinsville and they had Asheville and all those places. But there was nothing banked like Nashville.
This is a great training ground, and I learned so much here. The legend of this place and being a part of that legend, it's really important to me. It's been important in my career, and it's been important to the success I've had.
It was and still is the type track that just produces fabulous racing and produces fabulous race car drivers.
Often humorous, sometimes a bit outspoken, but rarely silent, and his articulate wit and quick sense of humor prompted his fellow competitors to nickname him Jaws.
I owned this joint. I owned this Fairgrounds racetrack. I owned every racetrack I went to until I went to Cup. And then I was just a small fish in a big pond. And the best thing I had going for me was my ability to talk and antagonize.
The drivers, they were very intimidated by television. They didn't like to face the camera.
Leroy, what happened out there?
Okay, I was following Benny, and David Pearson was behind me, and
man, I came along. I mean, I lit the joint up. You got any comment? Ain't you got anything to say?
You don't have to get
you
bossy.
Yankees are all alike.
You don't have to get bossy.
Never know what to say. Back to the tower.
Darrell, he just gets it. He understands the game.
A driver has to be good and lucky to win at Talladega. Darrell Waltrip, do you feel lucky today?
No, but I feel good.
When they needed stories, they always came to Darrell. And the reason was he always had something to say to them that was unique.
My mother was probably changing my diapers about the first time this race was run.
Don't see relief drivers very much anymore.
Well, it's hard on our pride.
Where can you rest on this racetrack?
In the pits. And if you got a good pit crew, it doesn't last very long.
Darrell was so good at psyching people out.
You know, when it's your turn to win or your track, I guess you're just going to win no matter what.
A lot of times we're not the fastest, but when the green flag comes out, we go to the front.
Joe, How does it feel to be the biggest cheater here today?
I always admired his confidence, and I think that carried him a long way in the sport. And the fact that he didn't mind speaking about it, I thought that was good too.
Well, here's Darrell Waltrip in the pits. Then Jarrett making his way over the Longo to try to find out what happened.
Almost lost the damn thing.
Racing here taught me about racing and how to race on difficult racetracks, but those guys taught me all about how to do TV and how to deal with the media and how to do interviews, and that turned out to be invaluable to me.
He was what I would call the first showman of the sport, and as a track owner, you're thankful for that because he puts the sport on the front page, and as a result, he sold tickets.
I always felt I needed to take the road less traveled because it's not so crowded. When I came in the sport, big belt buckles, cowboy boots, cowboy hats, not me. So I always tried to be different.
He embraced the media. He didn't run from it. I think he understood that this was a platform for him to be able to separate himself from basically the standard NASCAR driver.
Because of that, I had a bad reputation. Race fans at that time didn't like somebody different. All of a sudden, this smooth-talking, slick-dressed guy from Tennessee shows up and starts beating their heroes. You know, every week you wanted to have a rivalry. It sold tickets. It got headlines. It made news.
When he come in, he looked at it completely different, I think, than the good old boy deal, even though he's from Kentucky, Tennessee, whatever. He tried to put his mark on it, and he did.
Darrell Waltrip in the Mercury, number 95, has taken over the lead. He's a hard charger and considered to be one of the most promising rookies on the NASCAR scene.
I had to beat Richard Petty. If I was sitting here and you were sitting beside me and say, see that 43 car? He's the king of this sport. He's mine.
Coming to turn 3, 2 more turns to go. Richard Petty, Darrell Waltrip. Oh! Petty has got to leave, and there comes Waltrip. They're coming to the finish line.
And it really was showing Petty and was showing the world that this new superstar was here to stay.
Now here is Cale Yarborough trying to move back into second place, racing with Darrell Waltrip.
You see that 11 car? That's Cale Yarborough, 3-time consecutive champion. He's on my list. He's going down.
I think it was in Darlington. He crashed me one day and during the race.
Oh, big action. Both leaders are out of it. Cale Yarborough is still spinning down the track. So the mean old lady at Darlington jumps up and snaps both leaders, Darrell Waltrip and Cale Yarborough.
One of us would have won that race if we hadn't wrecked. And when they interviewed Cale, they said, what happened?
Some of the news reporter asked me what happened. I just said, Jaws got me.
It's always running that mouth and tearing up cars. Looked like Jaws to me. You know, everybody laughed, thought it was funny, and nobody thought about it sticking.
I just couldn't resist it. I called this friend of mine up down at the beach who was a shark fisherman, and I said, go catch me the biggest shark you can and bring it up to Charlotte.
Humpy Wheeler, great promoter that he is, thinking maybe a little different than everybody else, he decides he's going to elevate the legend of Jaws. They bring that shark back up to Charlotte, take the shark, hook it on the back of a wrecker.
That was pretty wild. I mean, the shark hanging upside down.
I'm not sure that Darrell was very receptive to that, but Humpy Wheeler didn't care.
And of course, Cale was raising Holly Farms chicken at the time. The coup was, I had a dead chicken that had not been plucked, and I stuck the chicken down in that shark's mouth.
The legend of Jaws. She was alive and well after that.
Darrell Waltrip, the new kid in town. With his first Grand National win coming only 2 weeks ago, the future looks bright for this 28-year-old youngster.
You know, back in the day, pretty much if you wanted to get into cup racing or really any kind of race, you had to do it on your own. You had to do it out of your own pocket. We start the 75 season and we got nice cars. I was spending money I didn't have, but people trusted me. First of all, they saw my passion. They saw my vision, and I could back it up.
Here comes Kyle Waltrip right. He really drove a good, hard race.
Dyegard was around at the time. Donnie Allison was driving for him.
My brother-in-law, the Dyegard, Mike the Prospero was his name. He was from Connecticut and hadn't made a lot of money before he was 30, and I had made a lot of money before I was 30. And he approached me in this game of pinochle about the fact that he had bought a car, Bobby Allison, who's having it built to run it at Daytona. And he said, would you like to go half with me? And I said, I don't know anything about racing. You know, that's not my world. And he said, come on, it'll be fun. Donnie Allison was driving the car, and the 4th of July race of 1975 didn't go so well.
We go to Daytona, it's 4th of July race, and car's running good. I passed Donnie on the last lap of the race.
Darrell Waltrip, the youngster who won earlier this year at Nashville, Tennessee. He takes the number 4 spot, and Donnie Allison will finish in the number 5 position.
And of course, I'm from a world of not losing. I'm used to making business deals and winning.
Bill Gardner, high-strung, big businessman, and he's not used to losing and getting beat every week by that 17 car and that kid from Tennessee that doesn't have 2 nickels to rub together, and he keeps beating us every week.
I'd made a decision that if I didn't feel we were that competitive and going to win, that we needed to make a change. And so after that 1975 4th of July race, I terminated our relationship with Donnie Allison.
Bill French said, have you seen Bill Gardner? They want to hire you to drive their car. I said, well, that's ridiculous. I got my own team. I got my own cars. I'm better than they are. So I get back in the car, and Steve and I are driving up the road, and I said, honey, you're not going to believe what just happened. That Dyegard bunch wants to hire me to drive their car. Of course, Stevie knows the financial shape we were in, how much money we were spending, how much money we owed.
We really didn't have anything going for us other than just his desire.
So in the middle of 75, we parked all my stuff. I called Jake and all the guys together and told them what I was going to do. And I said, but here's the deal. I'm going to make them hire all of y'all. And that's when things really improved.
Pulling away is Waltrip. At the line, Darrell Waltrip wins by 12 car lengths. The crowd up on their feet as the checkered flag falls for car number 88. Coming to the finish line, it is Darrell Waltrip winning the Rebel 500.
Seeing the hometown guy do that good that early, then you had to think there were better things down the road.
Darrell was driving the wheels off the car. Won 26 races. Was a testament to his capabilities and what he wanted to show the world. It was kind of like a coming out party.
We won several races in 77, 78, same thing, and then 79, we made a strong run at the championship.
Darrell Waltrip certainly is the man to watch this year.
Waltrip wins it by just about a half a car length.
I didn't get beat by the competition, I beat myself.
Look, we've got a situation at Darrell Waltrip. He's all over the racetrack.
Darrell Waltrip, who had built up almost a mile-and-a-half lead on his nearest competitor.
I've always regretted losing that championship. And so that was one of those life lessons I learned, and I take it with me everywhere I go to this day. Don't beat yourself.
We lost by 11 points to Richard Petty. And it's almost like in any sport, you know, teams that have won championships consistently, like a Richard Petty or the Wood Brothers or a Junior Johnson, they can let it all hang out more. I think we took more of a conservative approach.
Gale won 3 consecutive championships. He comes to me in 1980 and he says, I'm going to give you some of the best advice anybody ever give you. Junior doesn't even know it yet, but I want to run a partial schedule. I'm tired of racing every week. And I know that Junior would really like to have you in his car.
Darrell was a good guy. He liked to talk, but he was good. He was a good guy. He was a heck of a race car driver. And I felt like if I was going to leave one of the best positions in the country in racing, that I should let somebody know about it.
So naturally, Junior would look around, just like I would if I had been in his position at that time, and say, well, who is the best driver now in the sport? And obviously it was Darrell Waltrip.
When I lost Cale, you know, I knew that he was the next up-and-comer.
When we got word that Junior might be interested in having Darrell be his driver, that was huge to us.
I mean, the man's a legend, and he had the best car in the sport at the time and won championships and races, and he'd won 50 races himself. I was flabbergasted. But I had a problem. I had this darn contract.
I intend to enforce the contract to the letter of the law, and I hope that Darrell will be driving for us in 1981 and 82.
No one had did contracts at that time. They weren't from the business world that I was from.
So much language in there that there was no way that we were just going to be able to say, I'm walking.
I knew that major sponsorships required moral turpitude clauses and things that most of these drivers had never even heard of. There were no written contracts. So all this was new. My position was if he wanted to get out of the contract, that we needed to have compensation.
So we ended up negotiating a deal, and Junior ended up putting up $100 grand. Mountain Dew put up $100 grand, and I borrowed $100 grand from my father-in-law. It was an investment in my future. Probably could have stayed at Dyegard and toughed it out, but I wanted to drive for the legend. I wanted to drive for a man that I knew would take me from just being a race car driver to a champion. And because I'd seen what he did with Cale, and I wanted that too.
To be with Junior Johnson, it's like a rebirth for me, and I'm just looking forward to 1981. I think it's going to be the best year I ever had.
This is an opportunity of a lifetime. This could be my defining moment in the sport, and I knew that. Just one little small hiccup. The team did not want me to be their driver.
Honestly, it was more like, oh, dear God, please, not Darrell Waltrip. Because Darrell was one of our biggest rivals.
Well, Darrell wasn't no question he's going to be a great race driver. But everybody that I had on the team didn't like Darrell because sometimes he'd beat us.
It's a big learning process between when you're trying to get acclimated to a new guy, and now we're going into a model change year. All those cars came from 116 inches to 110 inches. The tread widths came from 66.5 inches down to 62 inches. And we were trying to refine and define that.
Those cars were evil, hard to drive. A lot like what we went through, you know, in the last few years with the COT car. Well, that was a big change in the 80s, just like that was a big change in 2000s.
Uh-oh, Waltrip spins as he comes off the turn forward.
Junior finally came to us, and he had a little meeting of the minds. He was about ready to have all he could stand with the crew. All he could stand with Darrell complaining about the crew.
Brewer and I are about ready to kill each other. Finally, Junior grabs us both by the collar and says, y'all come with me. And boy, when Junior gets mad, you got trouble. He pulled us up in the front of that old hauler, and he said, let me tell you two knuckleheads something. I'm sick and tired of your belly aching. Either you get out there, you get your heads together, you work on that car, and you get along, or guess what? You and you are both going to be looking for a job.
We got along fine after, a race or two. Darrell knew what he had to do, and he knew he had the best car on the racetrack, and he took it and proved it.
Darrell Waltrip receives the checkered flag and first place.
It's been the lucky weeks. Last week winning in Richmond and right here at Rockingham. Darrell Waltrip wins again, makes it 2 in a row.
Car number 11, driven by Darrell Waltrip, has dominated NASCAR Grand National Racing, winning almost every race it enters.
By the end of the season, we went to North Wilkesboro, Martinsville, Charlotte, and Rockingham in the fall. We sat on 4 poles and won 4 races in a row.
We came off with a brashness that I think really helped us take it to our competition and eventually, helped lead us to a championship in '81.
We ended up winning 12 races, the championship. Nobody could touch us.
But it looked like kind of an easier day for you.
That's the problem with me. I make it look too easy.
It was a perfect year. First team to be honored in New York at the Waldorf. We're just happy as we can possibly be. Me and Brewer and Harold and all of us were celebrating, and Brewer said, had a good year. Been good, but we're leaving. What? Yep, we're going to go to work for MC Anderson. Well, I was crushed. We just bonded. We just kind of all got together, and they were going to leave.
Their fortune became my fortune. because when everybody had left and the smoke had cleared, I saw an opportunity. So I walked in the office and I told Junior, I really would like to have a shot at being your crew chief. And he looked at me and he said, okay.
And everybody said, oh, it's a sinking ship. They'll never win another championship. Look at the people they got.
Darrell and I's relationship had been real rocky up to that point. But fortunately for me, I think he saw the sincerity and my commitment to him.
82 was a great year. 12 more wins, another championship.
I just need to thank Junior and Jeff Hammond and all the boys that work so hard on this race car. I tell you right now, we got a super crew for 82.
81 and 82, you couldn't have scripted better years for so many reasons. That $300,000 investment I made paid off.
He proved our side of it, and his side that he was the best driver at that given time, and he might very well could have been the best driver that's ever drove a race car.
Darrell Waltrip, a hand in the air, a wave to the crowd of 100,000 plus. He wins $200,000. He blows up. What a Hollywood ending.
The motor blew right when I took the checker. It blew all to pieces.
The guy just flat had the talent. He could wrestle it out of a car.
It's all over for the 1985 Winston Cup season. Darrell Waltrip wins the championship.
85, we win the championship, but it wasn't pretty. Junior decided that maybe I don't have the same desire I had, that the fire had gone out.
Junior was just Junior. He wanted everything his way, and I don't knock him for that. I mean, that's business. But I think that brought the downfall because Darrell's competitiveness never faltered.
During the 86 season, by now Rick Hendrick, this guy, this car dealer, all of a sudden he's getting his legs under him. And because he was a Chevrolet dealer, things started flowing over toward the Hendrick side and less toward the Junior side. But you tell Junior Johnson that, and he'd want to hit you with one of them left hooks. And so we were kind of coming apart at the seams.
Things like that happen. You don't get mad. You just move on and do the best you can.
So I called Rick up, and I say, Rick, let's do it. Ended up making the deal to drive the Tide car in 1987 because it had the makings of something really, really great.
About the only thing Darrell Waltrip has not won in his stellar Winston Cup career is the Daytona 500. But when he became the third driver in the Rick Hendrick stable, the odds became better than ever that he would break a long-standing drought.
You know, he'd won championships, he'd won a lot of races. But to really cap his career off, Darrell really wanted to win the Daytona 500.
In '89, we had this new engine package. We go to Daytona, and this thing was bad to the bone. I mean, it ran like it didn't even have a restrictor plate on it. Hammond and I all were so excited, we're nervous. Are we cheating on something? Is the engine illegal? What's going on? And a guy named Art Krebs checks the carburetor on all the engines. He takes my carburetor off, and he immediately says, you can't run that. So what do you mean we can't run that? That's not legal. So they took my carburetor. Well, that carburetor was worth about 15 horsepower. The carburetor we put on the engine, not so much power, but really good gas mileage.
And we are set to go racing 200 laps in the Daytona 500.
Door to door, nobody pulling out to pass. They just stay in line side by side as they head for turn one. Boy, Waltrip is in trouble. He's just falling way back.
The car was going slower and slower. Darrell was starting to get agitated and frustrated because he could feel this wind, getting away from him.
Okay, Darrell, let's go back through. When you get in position, tell me what you want to try and do to the car right quick. I think we ought to take two out of the right rear and put two in the left rear if you don't want to move in the front. Okay, I understand that, but if you think you need it in the front, now's the time to do it.
As the day went on, we kept coming in. We'd come in just on the car, come in just on the car. 500 miles, a long time at Daytona.
My job as a crew chief was to get him as happy as you possibly could at the end of the day. And we start thinking about this thing and all of a sudden realize, we pack that thing full of fuel in that last stop. We might be able to go distance.
When they gave one to go with 55 laps to go, We came down pit road. We topped up with fuel. Everybody else stayed out.
Are they going to be able to go that 55 laps on a tank of fuel?
Stevie had sat there and she had worked with the guys on the fuel mileage, and she did all the calculating, and she told Hammond we could make it.
And I said, you guys, we know how to lose this race. Let's win it. Let's take a chance here. What have we got to lose?
What has he got to lose?
That's right.
The only thing they remember is first place.
We're talking about 3 laps further than we've been all day. And he says, we're going to go for it. Draft. Sure enough, everybody starts stopping for fuel, and the first thing you know, it's just me and Alan Kowicki. It's obvious he's going to try to make it too, and I'm good, but I don't have the car to pass him with.
Well, here come those 2 cars, Kowicki and Waltrip. They are not making any effort to slow whatsoever. They're going to stay on the racetrack.
Lo and behold, he takes off up the hill.
Now Kowicki is out of the throttle. He drifts high in the banking. Darrell Waltrip takes the lead. Waltrip in front. I think he's going to take the gamble. He is drafting all around the track off anyone he can find, trying to conserve fuel.
Then we had the fuel pressure gauge, and that thing is jumping all over the place, and it's, you know, it's 7 pounds, it's no pounds, it's all over the place, and the motor's... I'm screaming on the radio, I'm not going to make it! I'm not going to make it! I'm out of fuel! I'm out of fuel!
You know, I was a cheerleader, and if you'd give him that little bit of encouragement, you know, when he started faltering a little bit, he'd bring it right back online.
I know it's tough, but you got to hang on.
1 lap to go. Will that fuel last?
One more lap, go in the first turn. Here we go again.
Waltrip under power still in turn number 3. I think he's going to make it.
Coming in the 3rd turn, I'm crying. I'm crying like a rat eating an onion. She's kind of chugging along. And sure enough, coasted across the start-finish line, won that stupid race that I've been trying to win for 17 straight years.
The Daytona 500 belongs to Franklin, Tennessee's Darrell Waltrip.
I won the Daytona 500. I won the Daytona 500.
Darrell, how long?
Wait. This is the Daytona 500, isn't it? Don't tell me it isn't. Thank God.
It just shows that as much as a perfectionist has always tried to be, that whole week was anything from perfect, but it ended up with the perfect result.
Check.
Boy, what an incredible list of people. Boy, I've done a pretty amazing job of hiring some very talented people. As good as '89 was. I mean, that was a great year. I won most popular driver. I won Daytona. I won 7 races. I won all my favorite races: Martinsville, Bristol, Atlanta, Charlotte, Daytona. And Hammond and I sat down one morning and I said, look, we can spend a sponsor's money just as good as these guys can.
I think we could have won a championship with Darrell if he'd stayed, but he had this desire to do his own team. You know, when a guy gets that in his head, then you've got to let him go do it.
I remember I never felt so helpless that when he finally separated from Rick Hendrick and I looked in that race shop and I saw my toolbox, that was it. And we were going to build a race team around that.
First year, me and Hammond, and we had a great group of guys. We were doing our own cars and getting the motors from Hendrick Motorsports. Everything started off beautifully.
And Darrell Waltrip will win his first race in September of 1989.
At the end of '91, I said, I can't believe I waited this long to do this. Got our legs under us in '92. We come out strong.
Here's Waltrip off of corner number 4, and the checkered flag waves.
Throw my heart out. For you. Yes. I'm close. For you.
At the end of '92, I looked at what we were doing, and I said, for us to get to where I want to go, first of all, we got to do our own engine program.
We had the equipment and the availability to build engines in-house, and it's just something that Darrell wanted to try.
That was the beginning of the end. That was my demise.
Darrell Waltrip in the pit area. Got the hood up on his car.
Problems with Darrell's power plant.
Going under the hood. Look at the smoke coming out now.
See it.
Yeah, you guys got it. He blew it up.
It broke me. It was costing me $600,000 a month to keep this place open. Well, the first month, that's $600,000. I'm okay. I'm okay. Next month, that's another. That's $1.2 million. I'm okay. The next month, another $600,000. That's $1.8 million. Whoop, time out.
I don't know that he ever doubted his ability as a driver, but as a car owner, yes.
I need to prove to some of you guys in here, a lot of you guys, probably all of you guys, as a matter of fact, that I can still get the job done. I'd just like to get myself in a position where I can be a race car driver.
If Darrell's not believed in, he doesn't perform well, and that kind of was going on.
My performance is down. People were making fun of me for taking champions provisionals. I didn't have the money. You know, I was in pretty bad shape.
Whatever the team needed, he wanted to give it to them. And he wants to be competitive. And so to sell his team like he had to was devastating for him. It was the hardest thing he ever had to do.
I needed to get out from under the headaches of owning a race team. Finalized that deal this past week with this gentleman sitting to my left here, Tim Beverly. He's a businessman. He thinks he can run the team better than I can, and I agree with him.
In the meantime, Earnhardt has started DEI, and he's got Pennzoil as a sponsor, and he was in a panic because Pennzoil was putting pressure on him. They weren't getting the results.
Steve Park.
Steve Park got hurt in Atlanta and broke his leg and couldn't drive.
You know, with Steve laid up and we're working on getting Steve well again, it gave us an opportunity to put a truly great driver in there and bring a lot of confidence to the team.
First of all, I was very honored and pleased that Dale would call me and ask me to do that at a time when he needed help and I needed help, and it did so much for me.
Darrell Waltrip running in 7th position, and he's feeling racy, isn't he?
Well, here goes Darrell Waltrip. This has kind of been a new lease on life for him.
It really pepped him up, and he got back to the old Darrell that we had known before.
All he's got to do is focus on driving. And look how well Darrell Waltrip is running. Look at him go!
Darrell, a lot of people left you for dead. You've shown them that you still have the fire.
They didn't put quite enough dirt on me. Kicked it off and crawled back out. I've been in holes before and crawling out of a pretty deep one right now, but damn, this is good.
If I could have stayed in that one car the rest of the year, I'm pretty sure I'd have won a couple of races for Dale. But that last couple of years I drove for Travis Carter and the Kmart team. You know, another couple of years of floundering around, not being very competitive. So I decided it was time for me to quit, and it was so sad.
Hard to believe, man, that I ain't going to do this no more. This is hard to believe. I have loved this, and I've done so much. Fought it so hard and so long. Hard to walk away from.
It was bittersweet, disappointing, but it was the right time to quit, and the right opportunity came along for me to get out of the car and then transitioning into the TV booth, where I'm just was a natural.
I know all too well it's a 400-lap race, but folks, what I'm worried about are those first 10. This racetrack's been laying here in the sun all afternoon, beating down on it. That turn up there, turn 3 and 4, it's like hitting glass.
I got to tell you, Larry, I think you'd agree, if that 48 car is that good this early, look out, because we know what he can do when the sun goes down.
Darrell's special. And somebody says, well, don't you get tired of playing second fiddle to Waltrip? No. That's been my role since '81. I love being his wingman, his co-pilot.
The accolades I've got for my work in television and the success I've had there far offsets any of those bad last 2 or 3 years I had in driving. So I'm proud of what I've done. I'm proud of my accomplishments, and I love my job. Can't imagine it could have worked out any other way. You know, we're sitting right here at the Nashville Fairgrounds Speedway, where it all started, and my first win in 1975. It started on a journey that I knew I wanted to go, and I knew what I wanted to happen, but I didn't know if it ever would or not. And so the sport has been good to me. It's been my platform my whole life. It's what I stand on. It's who I am. I've helped grow the sport. At times when you know, like in the 80s, when it needed a spokesperson, I was there. I hope people look at me and say that me being in this sport has made the sport better, because me being in this sport has made me better. I'm proud of what I've accomplished. And one of the things I always dreamed of was being called a Hall of Famer, and now I am.
I just went to work at a sawmill. It was like anything else. It's something you just did for a living, and later I just got to hauling lumber with a truck, and naturally, but cutting timber and stuff, somehow somebody come up with a wood chopper.
He had that across the top of his above a windshield.
It's not coming from having the last name Wood. It comes from the sawmill part of it with the wood chopper.
And when he'd pull into the racetrack and the announcer would say, well, here comes the wood chopper from Stewart, Virginia, you knew that you had a challenger that night.
Wood chopper chops his way to victory. I remember that one time you won the race. To this day, the people in town, when they see me, they'll say, hello, wood chopper.
Glenn Wood, he was the master.
You're going to see one of the great pit crews of all time right now, the Wood Brothers.
His pit crew get a tremendous amount of credit. The Wood Brothers, some of the nicest people in auto racing.
He made a lot of people famous.
Am I dreaming right now?
The Wood Brothers return to victory lane at Daytona.
Trevor Bayne gets the win for the Wood Brothers. The famous red and white, number 21.
Am I dreaming right now?
Well, this is fairy tale stuff. This is like Once Upon a Time.
The glass slipper fit.
The youngest driver here with the oldest continuous racing team. The legendary Wood Brothers.
Years ago, when we had a garden at home, we used to use a mule or a horse to plow it, and then you'd take a hoe and chop the weeds out all the way. And somewhere along the line, I decided there's something better to do than that. And now that I'm the age I am, it seems like I'm lost if I don't have a garden. If you grow a good crop, you're proud of it. It looks good, and it just, sometimes they do good and sometimes they don't. So that's sort of in racing. Sometimes you do well and sometimes not so well. I guess you get a taste for something like that, and I just like to grow it and see something grow.
The joyful harvest of a life lived to its fullest is a reflection of a seed nurtured by its surroundings. For nearly 2 centuries, this beech tree has shaded long-held family land. Its enduring strength, a reflection of a people, the Wood family. Rooted at the base of the Blue Ridge Mountains, the tree matured into a gentle giant. The breadth of its canopy respected far and wide. From this fertile soil emerges the story of Glen Wood.
There's a lovely tree in the dooryard down there. In fact, it's been chosen as one of the 100 most beautiful trees in Virginia. It's in a big, one of those coffee table books. It's right there on the farm in Stewart. They have the family picnics there underneath that tree. They're very proud of that tree.
The history behind it was unusual because a lot of trees don't survive as long as this tree, and it has a spring under it. We think the spring had something to do with its longevity.
And that's the tree that when Glenn Wood drove his first car and Brother Leonard helped him build it, they'd throw a chain up over a big limb in it and pull the motor out and put another one in. I think they're the first shade tree mechanics. I mean, it's that kind of down-home thing that was stock car racing before it blossomed.
Most everybody was a shade tree mechanic in that time.
Glenn was born in the summer of 1925 in rural southwest Virginia. Along with a sister, there were 5 Wood brothers: Clay, Glenn, Ray Lee, Delano, and Leonard. Glenn's mother, Ada, was a strong-willed but compassionate homemaker. His daddy, J. Walter, took on work where he could, from the coal mines to the local Ford garage. The Wood brothers learned by example, as J. Walter proved that necessity was sometimes a father of invention.
Daddy was a very talented mechanic. He was counted as the best mechanic in Patrick County. Anytime you realize you got a problem, you can't start a screw in a hard-to-get-to place or whatever, well, he come up with the idea, you just make him something to hold the screw to start it, you know. And I watched him right in front of a fireplace make these screwdrivers. This housing and all, he would stick it in the fireplace, heat it, and then hammer it flat on a anvil, and then do all this cutaway here with nothing but a file.
He'd be filing away like that, but he smoked. Had the old cigarette and he smoked, kind of leaning over like that, and the smoke run right up his eye like that. He'd close one eye and he'd keep a filing away on it and polishing it and everything.
How come you think Leonard got to where he is in this business? He inherited that for sure.
If they didn't have it, they didn't have money to go get it, to buy whatever it was, they'd make it. They got to have it. You need it. You just figure out a way to make it.
The innovation and work ethic of J. Walter was planted into his sons, and that environment cultivated NASCAR's longest-lasting team. Glenn formed Wood Brothers Racing in 1950, when he was 25. NASCAR was in its infancy, but the limb of this beech tree was already aged enough to support Glenn's budding interest in racing.
Glenn and Ray at that time was hauling lumber, and then Delano began to haul lumber a little later. There used to be a big rivalry between trucks, Ford, Chevrolet, Dodge, and GMC as to what pulled the most lumber, you know.
I had the 1.5-ton Ford, and you had the 2 tons, and you could just run off and leave me up them hills, too. You remember that?
When racing come along, we was ready to go, you know. It was already fired up in a sort of a competitive way.
This is on mountain roads. He's talking about spinning them out and, you know, doing like a bootleg turn with a truck, you know, and then get after us for driving fast. You can't do that now.
We did run some on the streets here. There weren't as many cars out there as is today, and cars didn't run that fast then either. And of course, my mom would tell them every time they left, "Don't run fast now, don't." And they, you know, they didn't want to tell them that because they knew that's what they was going to want to do.
It's a long time he wouldn't admit to doing none of that stuff. As you get older, you'll go ahead and tell stuff you did because, you know, it's kind of got that
cool factor.
Well, the statute of limitations has run out, or they can't get after you for it or something. You know?
I did have a lumber truck one time, and I got out on the track at Hillsboro. It was a mile track. I'd just been watching racing, so the track was open, so I just made a lap. But all I did was create a big dust behind me.
His first trip to Daytona was in 1947, and he didn't start driving until 1950. So, you know, he was a fan of the sport long before he started driving.
I think it was the excitement, the speed, the daredevilness.
One particular daredevil Glenn noticed was a former lumberman himself, Curtis Turner.
You know, Curtis was a wide-open, kind of wild man. They were both from that same section of Southwest Virginia. But Curtis had been a bootlegger, and Glenn had come from a family that was very religious and all that kind of stuff. They had nothing in common other than where they were from. But that meant a lot.
They'd drive, all load up and drive to Daytona Beach to watch Curtis Turner. He'll tell you to this day, Curtis Turner was the best ever lived.
That was his first hero, was Curtis Turner.
In Turner, Glenn saw a Virginia boy hard at work. While it wasn't standard work, the trophies showed it was work well done. In 1950, with help from a friend at the sawmill and his brothers at home, Glenn bought a race car, though he was nearly burned by the investment.
First car we had was 38 Ford Coupe, and Chris Williams and I, we were in the sawmill business together, and naturally we bought the car together. So we had it behind the car, towing it flat, towing it on the ground. Then we got halfway home and the axle broke and it fell down on the road and caught fire and burned up right in the middle of Route 58. And we sat there for 30 minutes, I guess, with it just burning. We dragged it home, and I guess we thought it was about over. And somebody said, well, maybe old Glenn scared him up and he won't do that no more. So that must have lit a little fire or something.
The 25-year-old driver and his band of brothers would need that fiery determination. Comments against a so-called career as a racer were almost as heated as the competition on the track. Competition that included Glenn's racing hero.
Curtis Turner was driving one time at Bowman Gray Stadium. Curtis spun Glenn. And some of us talking about how rough it was out there. Curtis said, yes, it wasn't it rough out there. Because Curtis won the race, but Glenn didn't, but spun him out.
I remember one time Bobby Myers and Curtis, they'd all had little run-ins or something, and Bobby was going to go over and fuss at Curtis a little bit. Yeah, but there's another time when he came over there with a tire tool and was going to whip up on Curtis, and Curtis pulled out a little pistol and says, what are you going to do with that? And he said, I was just trying to find a place to lay it down.
Times that I was privileged to race against Glenn, he did seem to have a different game face when he got in the race car. He was very intense.
He was a good, hard driver, but not a reckless type. If he couldn't take you with his kind of driving, he wouldn't, you know, knock you out or something other to get by you.
And I've never seen him get out of a car and run to somebody and get him a nape of the neck. Like, never. He wasn't that type of a driver.
I drove clean. I never really spun anybody out to speak of. Tried to drive under control all the time. What I thought I could do, it paid off.
Glenn's cool driving style made hot laps around the circuits of the Southeast. Soon, the wood chopper was topping the biggest names in NASCAR.
I saw Richard Petty. He was just beginning. I didn't even worry about him as a driver. He was young, and I could beat him about anywhere he went then. But then there was Papa Lee on the other side, and that was a different story.
One of his more satisfying wins was beating Lee Petty.
Lee told Glenn, said, if you pass me, says, you're going to do it on the outside. Says, you're not going to get it on the inside.
There was a slow car coming off of turn 2 that was on the bottom, and Lee went out wide, and the car turned out into the infield. And so he just slipped right up in his place. And he said, like, it just got all over Lee, so then Lee was trying to catch him to bump him and turn him around, but he never did. And, you know, it's beat Lee Petty. That was a big win.
Well, Bowman Gray Stadium was one of our favorite tracks, I guess, one of them.
All of a sudden, we just hit the right combination. Glenn goes out and wins like 4 in a row.
I always thought the best way to pass a guy on the outside at the stadium would have been go in and then cut in and get right beside of him. Not hit him exactly, but get beside of him. He would pull you around until you got on the straightaway and you had the best shot going off.
And you'd gain a foot. The next lap, you'd gain a foot, another foot, and once you got beside him, then it just blended out and long gone then.
He waited his time. He paced himself. He was on the guy, right at him. But when that guy make a little move, he was there.
He could run with the best of them. I mean, he's outrun Curtis Stern over there and all of them. He was good as they come at Bowman Gray.
With Glenn at the wheel, Leonard under the hood, and brothers and cousins in the pits, the team reshaped the approach to building a car. One that molded Glenn's driving style to the demands of competition.
At Bowman Gray Stadium, you always needed extra traction coming off a corner to keep it from spinning. So we decided to move a motor back.
And every time we'd pull it back a little bit, the starter would hit the frame, or we'd cut that out, and then something else would hit over here. And we ended up and pulled it back 2 feet.
Well, now the seat had to be moved back, and he ended up in the back seat.
That is plain common sense, to put that weight back there so that they get better traction coming off of the turns. And that's what every racer wants to do.
I was selling peanuts and popcorn in the grandstands at Bowman Gray Stadium when Glenn Wood, Curtis Turner, Billy and Bobby Myers were racing over there. And I remember when Glenn brought the old number 16 coach, he was sitting in the back seat.
I didn't know how I was going to drive it because it put me back in the back seat, and you're looking out over the front fender way over yonder, looked like, and had weight enough on the back that I could use the throttle to pick that wheel up and down. And a lot of times they'd carry it all the way to the other end before I let it down.
Thing just raise up, just grab it and go way down the straightaway, and it just come right on back down. That's just how smooth he was, and he was always a smooth driver.
Boy, Glenn would just smoke him and an old coach out there.
Well, they kind of laughed about it to start with, but when the season was over, they weren't laughing. We won the championship with it that year.
In the mid-50s, automakers were looking to turn weekend success into weekday sales. That brand name backing sold Glenn on a move up to Grand National Racing, to partner with another family-based auto business.
Ford had the factory teams. Curtis Turner and Joe Weatherly suggested to Ford that they bring us on board. It really started on the Ford Motor Company.
Glenn Wood built a relationship early with Ford, and they liked his style, and still do.
If you ask for a common thread in Ford racing, it's the Wood brothers. I mean, they started with us so early in their careers that I think they just decided they didn't want to change.
Well, Peter DiPaolo was the head of the Ford racing, and he gave me a call and congratulated me on how I was doing. He said, well, what do you need? I said, well, the car's ready to go to Richmond now, and all I need would be a set of tires. So he had them to roll me out 6 tires, and we went to Richmond and won that race. Till this day, we've been with Ford ever since.
When you stop to think that he raced dirt, he raced asphalt, he raced the sand, he raced in modified, sportsman, convertible. You know, all those totaled together, it's almost 100 victories.
Glenn's diverse collection of race wins rivaled his diverse skills overseeing the race team. Gradually, his time in the cockpit of the number 21 took a back seat to the demands of business.
64 at Starker was the last race I ran in. Marvin Panch and I and John Moose promoted that race. Marvin was driving the car most of the time then, and I'd sort of slacked off, and I'd been running with the modified there, and I'd won about 7 or 8 in a row, and we felt like if I drove, I might draw more people, so that was the reason I was in it that night.
Well, me and Glenn had found a place in Winston-Salem that recapped tires, and they was a lot softer than the tires you could buy. And I think me and him was the only two that knew about it. Well, I run over something and cut one of my tires.
They came over and said, could we look at your best tire and see if we can put it with our best one, and maybe we can finish the race with it.
He wasn't wanting to lend me a tire because I was on the same setup that he had, and one of us is going to win the race.
So I let him have it, thinking he'd probably blow it out anyway. But I knew if it lasted, he'd lap the field with it. I guess 5 or 6 laps from the end, I felt something tap him in the back end. Who is that? And I looked, and it was Pearson and Cotton Owens Dodge. And there was 2 Fords in front of me, and I think, well, I'm not going to let him by if I can help it.
Yeah, he kept, cutting me off, stuff like that, but he come apologized after the race and told me that, he said, I hated it done that. He said, well, I was promoting the race, and I didn't really have the money, to pay off, so I had to do what I could to, save as much as I could.
And sure enough, I did outrun him in the race. But he was the promoter. He did what he needed to do to promote the race.
And had I known that had been the last race I'd drive in, he wouldn't have ever got those tires.
The racing career of Glenn Wood started under the shade of a dignified beech tree in Southwest Virginia. As Glenn and Wood Brothers Racing grew, NASCAR grew. The number 21 car and team were an emerging force in a sport reaching toward the future.
You can tell by looking at Charlotte Motor Speedway that it has a special personality of its own. The front stretch bends twice between the 4th and 1st turns. Turns are banked at 24 degrees. The track is big, beautiful, dangerous.
Curtis Turner opened Charlotte Motor Speedway in 1960, and for its fall race, he was eager to promote Glenn's 21 car with Speedy Thompson behind the wheel.
I wasn't going because the track was rough. It was the first year it was built. I just wasn't going. I didn't have a driver, and I wasn't going to drive it down there. And we decided we'll put Speedy in our car. And so after a while, Speedy was running fast as he was, wasn't it?
He just run right on them all day long and then end up winning the race.
Just shortly before that, I had wondered if we could keep going. It had just got to be a rough time. Luckily, we went down there and Speedy won the race.
We'd never won no race like that, you know. I said, "Well, how much does this thing pay?" He says, $10,000. Oh man, that was a million now, you know.
And Paul Sawyer at Richmond come up just shortly after and said, "I'll give you $2,500 to bring that car to Richmond." Speedy went up there and won that. And he also said, "If you bring Weatherly in your other car, I'll give you $1,000 for that." So we had $3,500 to go up there, and that might have been more than the purse was.
At a time when NASCAR held 40 to 60 events a year, Glenn ran a partial schedule. He was always aware of what it took to compete within his given resources. By entering the bigger events, the ones that paid the most, he could efficiently keep his family-run team competitive. And the achievements of the 21 soon became legendary.
It's the 1963 running of the Daytona 500. And today we should see one whale of an automobile race.
Here's Tiny Lund. Tiny is in this car today that was assigned to Marvin Pants.
A week before the big race, Panch flipped on the track in a sports car, and he was pulled to safety by Tiny Lund, another driver. Tiny has been racing 18 years without a major win. Crew chief and car owner Glenn Wood put it this way.
We wanted him to drive, one thing, because Marvin suggested it, and two, you have to have a good driver. And Tiny always drove hard, and we figured he could do it.
Still a three-car race as Freddie Lorenzen, Ned Jarrett, and Tiny Lund continue this bumper-to-bumper drafting as we go in to the final laps of the Daytona 500.
Lorenzen, the leader, is pitting. He's coming in for gas.
10 laps from the end, Lorenzen come down pit road.
Lorenzen is coming into the pit area. Ned Jarrett is taking over the lead. Tiny Lund is in second place.
5 laps to go. Ned Jarrett was next.
Second gasoline victim coming in for car number 11 for just a few pints of gas.
Tiny Lund has a firm hold on first place. If his fuel will hold out.
Well, it went another lap or two. Well, when the Wood brothers coming in? They'd come up and ask us. I said, "Well, we don't plan to."
The checkered flag for Tiny Lund, the man who got his chance and came through.
Tiny said he run out of gas on the last lap.
The crew joins him in the winner's circle for the glory of getting home first and the biggest purse ever offered in a stock car race.
After that 1963 Daytona 500 win, they were just the car to beat at almost every track that you went to.
Even though Glenn was no longer driving, he remained the one steering the company. And everyone at the shop in Stuart, Virginia, was on board with the plan.
He was one guy that you could tell when he was racing would make a good car owner, because he knew how to get along with people. He knew how to motivate people. Plus, he had all those brothers sitting up there in Stuart with nothing to do.
Car number 21 coming in to the most skilled pit crew in the world, probably the Wood brothers, Glenn and Leonard and Delano and all the others.
The sixth sense between Glenn and his 4 brothers on pit road transformed racing. Using the innovative Wood spirit to modernize and finally choreograph each movement, they addressed the problems that cost other teams valuable seconds on pit road.
When you lose 30 seconds standing still, there's hardly no way to make it back if the competition's running 137 miles an hour or better. David Pearson brings the later Mercury in, and the Wood brothers are on it.
There, coming in.
Glenn Wood told us what happens on a pit stop.
Well, I usually stop the car, and Leonard changes the front tire, and Rapid with the back. Delano, other brother, uses the jack. And Clay, another brother, helps with the back wheel. But then if anybody gets done a little ahead, and there's something yet to do, which one gets done first does it.
I didn't have to wonder what Ray was going to do. I didn't have to wonder what Leonard was going to do.
But he never chewed us out because he knew we was doing our very best.
David Pearson with the Woods Brothers Mercury. They have become a legend in NASCAR Grand National Stock Car Racing.
Anybody that can keep brothers together and keep them motivated is the greatest manager in the world.
Glenn had a team that won races from pit road, a car that could outlast the rest of the field. And because he knew what it took to drive a team, the best drivers in the world were eager to join the Wood brothers.
No matter who the driver was, everybody always turned into like an adopted part of our family.
Glenn had that unique ability to know what Ford wanted out of them and what kind of drivers to put in his car, and he made a lot of people famous.
Anybody who was a race driver would love to drive that car number 21.
When you look at the 50 greatest drivers that NASCAR says is their 50 greatest drivers, 20-some odd of them have driven for Glenn Wood.
Another one of our outstanding drivers was Dan Gurney. We went to Riverside. He won 4 races for us out there. He was just one of the best at that time in road racing.
Dan Gurney, and then Parnelli Jones won for us.
Parnelli Jones on the very first lap, past 18 cars.
I ran 5 years for him, and I never enjoyed driving for anybody more than I enjoyed driving for the Wood Brothers.
Cale Yarborough, winner of the race in car number 21.
It was such a great honor to get in that car and really drive a hell of a race car.
He wins the Daytona 500, and that's an appropriate size. While the jubilation goes on with the Woods brothers.
And Glenn called one day and asked me, would I like to run for them? And I said, Lord, yeah. You know, that tickled me to death. I didn't go to a race that I didn't feel like I could win.
David Pearson's done it. Silver clock as he storms across the finish line to win for the 8th time at the Michigan International Speedway.
When you got those kind of drivers driving for you, your stock goes up.
I went up to Stewart, Virginia, and walked in and looked at the pictures on the wall of the people that had won races for the Wood brothers and going, wow, I hope I didn't bite off too big a piece here.
Checkered flag for Buddy Baker.
I still pinch myself that I got an opportunity. It's unbelievable.
The humble beginnings of Glenn Wood's race team make his impact on NASCAR all the more impressive. In addition to the decades of success, the reach of this shade tree mechanic shows his lasting influence and the admiration for his character.
We went to Indianapolis in 1965. John Cowley came to me at Darlington and said, how would you like to go to Indianapolis? I said, I don't know. Why? He says, to pit Jimmy Clark. I thought he was kidding.
We'd already had the pit stops worked out in the stock cars, and Clark had some problems in the year before, and they just wanted the Wood brothers to pit Jim Clark.
They were the best of the best at that time when Jimmy Clark took that car to Indianapolis.
The 1965 Indianapolis 500 was an important opportunity for Ford. Open-wheel legend Jim Clark would pilot an innovative rear-engine car, with further innovation coming from a NASCAR pit crew. One Ford knew it could trust. Even though Glenn and his brothers were branching out into a new racing discipline, they retained their usual discipline on pit road.
The little screaming engines going by, you know, you kind of get jumpy, you know. But when that little car darted off of the track coming down the pit road, I got in at 21 mode. Everything just went so smooth.
I remember telling Jimmy Clark, now it's real important you stop at the right place, because if you overshoot it, the hoses will buckle, and if you don't get there, they won't reach. He said, you just tell me where to stop. He put it right on the money.
The pit stop takes 17 seconds. Very short. Clark comes down the straightaway and moves back into the lead. Gets with it for Andretti is coming up.
The rest of them didn't make nearly as good a stops as we did.
Jimmy Clark crosses the finish line to become the victor of the 1965 Indianapolis 500.
We had to do that for Ford. They was our buddies. And it's the most worldwide attention we ever got for anything.
Bill France Sr. was up in the stands, and he was up there watching us, and he jumped up and said, that's my boys, that's my boys.
I think that was huge for NASCAR, that they would be selected to go to Indianapolis and revolutionize their pit stops there, and just blew everybody away.
Achievements like the win at Indy proved Glenn Wood's team was revolutionary, with a tight-knit crew pitting the top car in NASCAR and future Hall of Famers in the driver's seat. It was now time to carve out the next chapter in the Wood brothers' story.
Mid-'80s, Glenn and Ed had been going around with us for several years before that, and it began to be obvious that they needed to learn this so that they could do it and we didn't have to.
Got to where we were actually working around the car. We were always Daddy's helper.
Just like building a gear or something. Daddy would make you stand there and show you how to build a gear. So at least you had the knowledge of how it went together. Whether you built any more or not, it didn't really matter. But he wanted you to know what was going on. And at some point, Daddy gave each of us 5% of the company. And then later, he started giving us another 5 and another 5. And pretty soon, about 1983, okay, we're like 25% owners each. And it's almost like flipping a light switch. Hey, wait a minute, this might be what we're doing the rest of our life.
He had a lot of faith in his sons, and his sons are very smart and very talented. One of the big reasons we're still in it today is because they were smart enough to keep it running.
When we came along, we kind of brought some of the younger drivers, it was a different time. They were all just like family, just like Pearson and Cale and Marvin and all those guys were.
Kyle Petty in the car number 21. The Wood brothers spent a long time been in victory lane here. Glenn and Eddie and all the Wood brothers, 1982.
He had brought this business along. He had brought it to a point to where when Eddie and Lynn, when I started driving for him in the mid-'80s, it was their time to take the business and grow the business. And he was there to help them. He was there to guide them. He was there to steer them.
Kyle Petty is going to win the Coca-Cola 600. What a day for Kyle Petty and the Wood brothers team.
By lifting a new generation onto the NASCAR stage, a second generation of Woods carried their father's name forward.
At the line, who wins it? Dale Jarrett won it. Here goes Michael Waltrip for the lead. Michael Waltrip takes advantage of her arm body touching. What a super run for the Wood brothers Ford. Here they come to the flag. Sadler wins it. How about Elliott Sadler? His first win, and for the Wood brothers, some of the nicest people in auto racing.
Really, it was kind of seamless. It was the same. I don't know, it just worked.
After a quiet, dominating career, Glenn Wood had prepared his children to carry Wood Brothers Racing forward. NASCAR shifted toward multi-car, highly specialized teams during this transition, But tradition is ingrained in the spirit of the 21. Tradition, the strength drawn from deep roots, brought Wood Brothers Racing yet another moment forever grafted into the legend of NASCAR.
I started going to Daytona in 1947, and I've been down there every year since. We'd never seen long straightaways like they had down there. That was a year before NASCAR was formed. So we've always went to Daytona to the races.
I love the road trip. So right before Daytona, I was like, man, I'm just going to cruise down, take my time. The plane actually left like an hour after I did, so they beat me there by like 4 hours. But I just like to get it all in, just kind of calm down and get ready for what's going to be ahead. The background that they've built with those kind of drivers, for them to take that kind of experience and put that faith in me, that means a lot to me. Lynn and Eddie and Leonard and Glenn and all those guys with the Wood Brothers, they're a great family. I mean, they're really supportive. Think back of the famous paint schemes, the red and the white and the gold, and it's just a lot of history. It's cool to be the next step in that history.
Going for green, white checker, 2 laps to glory.
Ready, green flag, green flag.
Come down to that finish, you know anything can happen then.
The 20-year-old Trevor Bayne driving the legendary Wood Brothers number 21, hopefully to victory in the Daytona 500, but he's got work to do. Trevor Bayne in his second Sprint Cup start will lead them to the white flag.
And one of the women there just jumped up and down like we'd won the race. I says, that was a white flag. Oh. So we got to go another lap.
Got 2 cars out the back that could come into play.
Young Trevor Bayne driving for his life on the final lap of the Daytona 500. Labonte takes a peek to the outside, tucks right back in. When will the challenge come? Something's got to give. Here comes Carl Edwards. He's got momentum. David Gilliland giving him a shove to the inside of Labonte. Now Trevor Bayne will cross over the final time off 4.
Trevor Bayne gets the win for the Wood Brothers, and they're dancing on pit road.
You just want all right, baby. I hear you. You are the man.
Oh my goodness. The Wood Brothers return to victory lane at Daytona. The red, the white, the gold numbers. It is the 5th Daytona 500 win and the 98th career win for the Wood Brothers.
The youngest driver here with the oldest continuous racing team, the Wood Brothers, back in victory lane at Daytona.
Am I dreaming right now?
I realized that everybody around me was affected by this. I was just glad I got to be that little puzzle piece that fit into that.
I was fixing to go to victory lane. I didn't really even know where to go. I didn't know whether it was this way or this way. And I felt this presence coming up. And I looked up and it was Richard Petty. And he said, where's your dad? I'll take him to victory lane. He went and got him around the shoulder, you know, how he does. And I thought, I'm going to watch this.
Can you climb across here? I need to go. Yeah, I can do that.
I think that win reignited what fans years ago knew about them. Maybe some had forgotten.
It's been maybe 20 years ago that some of the prominent car owners had said something about that time had passed us by. And, well, I think the board decided it hadn't passed them by.
Other than maybe when they won their first Daytona 500, which was, you know, your first one's your first one. But I think it's probably the biggest thing that's happened to our race team since then.
We made 7 decades for our family of winning races.
There's been some spectacular victories, but this one was pretty good, and I think it's one of the prouder moments that he's had.
I don't know. I just couldn't believe it happened.
You know, he started with nothing and, you know, worked hard his whole life to get what he's got.
He epitomizes what NASCAR was and what NASCAR is and what NASCAR can be.
The class that he brought to our sport, it's pretty amazing all they've done.
But it's not his legacy. It's a family legacy.
Having to work under a shade tree to build those race cars and to carry that through more than 60 years and still building is very, very special for Glenn and this team.
His handshake was and is all you need. That's what I want.